who are both working in the diamond industry and in the fashion industry and the food industry. So here again, the idea is that if you're able to identify with certainty the provenance and who owns the rare piece of art or fashion or whatever object that has rarity, you will be able not only to have certainty and combat fraud, but also enrich the piece, and it will gain value over time and create a marketplace where people have more access to all these assets. So those are the key trends. And I'll leave you with some thoughts, because we only have 1 minute left, of how the blockchain is going to transform this entire industry. So I was talking about the client experience. So if you're already a large company, you're going to be able to create wallets, digital identities for your clients, enrich the data, use data analytics and AI to, and powered by blockchain, to really create a different experience for your clients. You'll be able to tokenize some of the items. You'll be able to sell some of the items exclusively and sell them through crypto. One of the watch companies just did that recently, where they did an exclusive sales where people could only buy with Bitcoin. So that enriches the client experience. Then with the provenance, you'll be able to create marketplaces where not only you as a company are the owner of the clients, but you're creating a marketplace that's bigger than you. And if you tokenize that marketplace, then you can reap the benefits of it, and you can create incentives for people to get either certified, to provide services, to create new opportunities for your clients, and create a global marketplace. The supply chain remains a really important added value of the blockchain, and I think today it would be very risky for a company to try not to combat slavery and provenance issue on their supply chain. So it's really a key trend that we see with our clients, and everyone is trying to crack that issue with the blockchain. And they see the immediate benefits of using the blockchain, because you don't have to replace your entire systems. You can add a blockchain layer to an SAP existing supply chain. You can integrate it. You can really work with it. And then, as I mentioned with Mecenas, you can create digital assets, create new opportunities for people to invest in this space where people didn't have access to, whether it's luxury yachts, whether it's lodging or specific experience. People will be able to have access to a tokenized economy of these luxury goods, where they don't have to own anything, but they can own a right to engage in it for a certain period of time and then sell it. So I think that's the beauty of what we'll see in the coming years with blockchain and this industry. Thank you. Any questions?
Hello, hello, hello. So the next, if you guys have your brochures in front, I know you guys are thinking, where is Alan Watts? How many of you know Alan Watts? How many of you don't know Alan Watts? Well, this is your lucky day, right? Somewhere around November, December, after we had done our BLOCKCON last year, I was going through, I would like put YouTube videos on the background while I'm working. And there was this playlist called Man of No Ego. You probably see it playing here. And in between, they had Alan Watts quotes in between. And after a while, I'm like, who is this guy who's talking? It's very intriguing. So I dig up on that YouTube playlist. And lo and behold, I fall into like a whole night of research into Alan Watts. And since then, I've been like always, I had this thought like maybe it will be interesting to invite Alan Watts and talk. So I go to his Wikipedia page and I see like, okay, that's not possible. So our next best bet was to invite Annie and Joanne to come up and tell us a little bit about Alan Watts, the philosophy, his teachings, and maybe quirks and pet peeves, just to get to know the man better. And before I ask them to come on stage, we have a quick 2-minute video that we wanted to show you. So I'll let you guys see that and we'll come right back up.
First to school. You went to kindergarten. And in kindergarten, the idea was to push along so that you could get into first grade, and then push along so that you could get into second grade, third grade, and so on, going up and up. And then you went to high school, and this was a great transition in life. And now the pressure is being put on. You must get ahead. You must go up the grades and finally be good enough to get to college. And then when you get to college, you're still going step by step up to the great moment in which you're ready to go out into the world. And then when you get out into this famous world comes the struggle for success in profession or business. And again, there seems to be a ladder before you, something for which you're reaching all the time. And then, suddenly, when you're about 40 or 45 years old in the middle of life, you wake up one day and say, huh? I've arrived. And by Jove, I feel pretty much the same as I've always felt. In fact, I'm not so sure that I don't feel a little bit cheated. Because you see, you were fooled. You were always living for somewhere where you aren't. And while, as I said, it is of tremendous use for us to be able to look ahead in this way and to plan, there is no use planning for a future, which when you get to it and it becomes a present, you won't be there. You'll be living in some other future which hasn't yet arrived. And so in this way, one is never able actually to inherit and enjoy the fruits of one's action. You can't live at all unless you can live fully now.
So what had happened is every time I would look at playlists and looked at some of his speeches, I found that it was very thoughtful, very deep from a consciousness perspective, that hey, happiness is within you. And you're going to kind of see this tone tomorrow as well when Naval is here and when Naval is doing the fireside chat with Nassim, that you don't have to run after a Lamborghini. You don't have to think about 1 year from now I'll be in a happy place, or when I make more money I'll be happy. It was like this kind of a mental model that happiness is within you. And I thought it would be a good conversation item to at least discuss and see and introduce Alan Watts to our audience. And without any further ado, I'll invite Joanne and Annie on stage. And come on up. me grab you a chair. Thanks, Burrow. Here you go. Are you guys comfortable? Right? The stage is all yours.
Can we have another hand of that? Have not heard of Alan Watts. Okay.
It's so funny. So Joan and I know nothing about Bitcoin or BLOCKCON or any of that. We just got an email from Kurt asking if we would do a presentation on Alan Watts. And I was really curious. I thought, so why are you wanting us to come? Like, I have no idea where I'm coming. And he said, because when he asked you folks what was the biggest interest outside of this, it was Alan Watts. And I have to say, it's such a sweet thrill to have many of you have come up to us and said what a difference Alan has made in your lives. And that's something that's really precious for us to hear. So we're going to present this.
I think we'll start. We only have 30 minutes, but now we have 29 minutes and 36 seconds. So we put together this book of his letters, and I have to say that this was the 20th century, and people wrote letters to each other. Long letters sometimes, and it's a real treasure because you find out so much about the person's life, their interests, their thoughts, what was going on at the time period. It's a real snapshot of the time in which he lived. We don't get that anymore because everybody is texting or emailing, and everything is in shorthand, so to speak. And it's going to be kind of sad. I don't know what the future will be in the technical field where everything is computerized, but not necessarily people's thoughts and whatever their lives are and so on. So in a way, this is perhaps one of the last books of its kind of letters. There have been many books of people's famous people's letters and so on. So anyway, I'm going to give you a little intro about who Alan Watts was. Maybe some of you won't know some of this. It's amazing to us what mentioning Alan Watts at a social gathering will often evoke. Overwhelmingly, the reaction is, "You've got to be kidding. He's your father? His books changed my life." Other reactions have included such statements as, "May I kiss your feet?" or "Can I touch you?" or "You seem too normal to be his daughter." Alan Watts, philosopher and interpreter of Eastern philosophy and religions and Christian doctrine, had for years answered the big questions. Why are we here? And what is the meaning of our existence? His explanations resonated with people of all walks of life and beliefs. It has been over 40 years since his death, and yet his writings and lectures are more popular than ever worldwide. Glance through YouTube to view him lecturing or Google his name, and you will find many sites with information about him. Wikipedia has a long synopsis of his philosophical beliefs, personal life accomplishments, and bibliography, as do many other sites. His books are published in more than 27 countries and in many languages, including Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. There are at least 5 Facebook pages dedicated to discussions about his life and writings. Amazingly, there are murals that bear his portrait on public buildings in at least 3 countries. We often wonder how in the magnificent plan of this universe we came to be the children of a world-famous thinker, writer, philosopher, and authority on Christian and Asian religions. But the universe thought we should be daughters of Alan Watts, a precocious child born to an English couple of modest means in a suburb of London, Chislehurst, Kent. Alan, our father, born in 1915, 1915, during World War I, was the only surviving child of Lori and Emily Watts. Alan was absolutely cherished by his parents, who doted on him, encouraging his intellect and interests at every turn. Alan was equally devoted to his parents, and as the reader will see, stayed in constant contact with them throughout his life, with letters addressed to dear Mummy and Daddy. We both had the opportunity to live in his birthplace with his parents, Joan for 1 year, Anne for 5. We loved Rowan Tree Cottage, as the home was named, and the exquisite garden our parents had created. They had the equivalent of half an acre of artfully designed with flower beds, grassy paths, accentuated by beautifully trimmed shrubs. This is the environment in which Alan grew up. Eventually, his parents realized they should send him to a school where he might get a better education than the local school he had been attending. So at 7, he was sent off to St. Hugh's School, a boarding school near Chislehurst, and then eventually at age 13 to King's School, Canterbury in 1928. He discusses his experience of boys' boarding school life at length in his autobiography, In My Own Way, in which he writes about his education as considerably more than book learning. When Alan was 14, the family of a schoolmate at St. Hugh's took him to Paris and introduced him to the European lifestyle, which he found to be more stimulating than the rigid environment of King's School in Britain itself. Alan began to picture himself as an adult. During his years at King's School, he discovered Zen Buddhism. Eventually, he became involved with the Buddhist Lodge in London after he had submitted a pamphlet entitled Zen and had been invited to speak to the members, who were shocked to learn that Alan Watts was a mere lad of 15. This was also his introduction to his mentor, Christmas Humphreys, and others involved in Buddhism. Alan's father went with him to lodge meetings and eventually became the treasurer. As his parents didn't have the means to send him to university, he set about to learn more on his own, voraciously reading the books of D.T. Suzuki, Friedrich Nietzsche, Lao Tzu, H.P. Blavatsky, Lafcadio Hearn, Bernard Shaw, Robert Graves, and C.G. Jung, to mention a few. All this literature was considered oddball and had been screened out of his general school curriculum. At this point, he was 17. He was being influenced by many of the people he met in philosophical circles. It was during this time that he met Suzuki, the philosopher Dmitry Dmitrievich, and Jiddu Krishnamurti. He was quite active with the World Congress of Faiths held in London in 1936. By the time Alan reached 20, his first book, The Spirit of Zen, was published. He and others had discovered that he had a gift for wordcraft, the ability to describe the meaning of what he was writing in a way that was easy for anyone to grasp, almost as if he were painting a picture with words. Through all this, he learned that he wanted to experience life on his own terms, not necessarily according to the societal or ideological mores of the time. Anne?
So that's from the foreword written by my sister Joan. And there are so many letters in this book that he wrote to many famous people like Henry Miller and Gary Snyder and Carl Jung. And we were going through the letters and we were thinking what would be of interest to this particular group. And what I'm going to read you now is, Joan and I did annotations to kind of tie things together. And so we do a lot of the kind of background in the book. And this is a little piece that I wrote, and I just, it's not a letter, it's by me, about someone that Alan was corresponding with. And this is in July of 1944. In Alan's autobiography, he writes of a certain Jim Corsa, who described himself as a penniless hermit living on Captiva Island off the coast of Florida. He requested a copy of Alan's newly published book, The Meaning of Happiness, then in its second printing, in exchange for a collection of seashells. Bitcoins? Clearly, Alan was intrigued, acknowledging that shells had once been used as money. He sent the book, and shortly thereafter received a box, and this is in quotes, a box of true miracles recently washed up on the same beach from which Anne Morrow Lindbergh received her inspiration for Gift from the Sea. So Alan was already engaging in that type of commerce.
The next letter is just a very brief letter to Gary Snyder, and this is from circa 1959. Have been reading all about you in Dharma Bums. Terrific. I'm going to LA until September 29, but I want to see you after that. Will you buzz me? I hope Kerouac has done a good job of characterization. If so, I know you a lot better. Alan Watts.
Okay.
So you need to know the page of the next
All
one.
right, this is
The Margaret Rioche letter.
Dear Margaret
Yeah.
Rioche,
Yeah.
and this is September 21st, 1964. He says, as to the subject of my lecture, Controlling Consciousness, the topic is simply this. As we perfect our skills in psychotherapy, neurological manipulation by electrical stimulation of the brain and by drugs, by new methods of propagandizing the unconscious, and even by the control of genes, we come within sight of being able to produce the kind of human beings we consider desirable. The problem is then, what sort of people should we desire, and who has the authority and/or wisdom to decide? One of the biggest issues of the future is therefore what might be called neuropolitics, the debate and contest of how the nervous system should be controlled, assuming that we gain the power to control it. The subject of psychedelic drugs is incidental to this lecture, but you can bet your life that the audience will stress it to the limit in the question period. Off the record, isn't it simply contemptible that at a time when there is immense public curiosity about LSD, etc., that the psychiatric profession puts its head in the sand and doesn't want to have anything to do with it? Given a chance to look into the innermost workings of the psyche, they slam the lid on it.
Okay, so the next. This is in July 7th of 1967 to Miss Marilyn Kelso, who was on the staff of Look magazine in San Francisco. Dear Miss Kelso, thank you very much indeed for your letter of July 5th enclosing the article by George Leonard and Marshall McLuhan. I'm at once astonished and delighted that such an article can appear in a great national periodical. This country is in serious trouble, both at home and abroad, because of the dominance of what McLuhan and Leonard call the narrow-gauge specialized male. A total 100% male has, of course, nothing in common with women, and therefore cannot relate to them except as dames to be made, and then chalked up as evidence of masculine prowess as an ace pilot notches his plane for every enemy shot down. These unhappy brutes are so terrified of the tender, voluptuous, and yielding aspects of their own biology that they identify them with homosexuality and sissiness and build up the hard-shell crustacean character armor that is so commonly affected by our police, military men, business tycoons, and politicians. Their substitute for erotic ecstasy is to grind a hobnailed boot into someone's face. One can only hope that McLuhan and Leonard are right in feeling that this kind of masculine role-playing can be dissolved in laughter instead of blood.
And so we wish it were. Another letter that actually the key to this part is about death. But I thought the opening paragraph was also interesting. He's writing to the Playboy Forum here, and this is in 1968. He says, under the cover of lusty and curvaceous chicks, of whom I approve, and of silly bunnies, of whom I disapprove, you have turned Playboy into the most important and philosophical periodical in this country. I'm a little nervous about admitting this, but by comparison, The Journal of American Philosophical Society is pedantic, boring, and irrelevant. Your recent interviews with Marshall McLuhan and Allen Ginsberg, your articles by Romaine Gary, Arthur Clarke, Justice William O. Douglas, Alan Harrington, and many others, all these are intellectual stimulation of the highest order. How on earth do you get away with it? And now here he approaches this subject. Consider the following points. Death is not a sickness or disease. It is an event as natural and as healthy as childbirth, or as the falling of leaves in the autumn. B, as the natural childbirth, obstetricians are training women to experience the pains of labor as erotic tensions. There is no reason why the pangs of death should not be reinterpreted as the ecstasies of liberation from anxiety and overloads of memory and responsibility. C, suppose that medical science achieves a method of getting rid of the overload of memories and anxieties. Isn't this what death accomplishes already? D, the funk about death is the illusion that you are going to experience everlasting darkness and nothingness as if being buried alive. E, the nothingness after death is the same as the nothingness before you were born. And because anything that has happened once can happen again, you will happen again as you did before, mercifully freed from the boredom of an overlong memory. So I thought that might be of interest to you as well.
So one quick, well, let's see. That's not the letter I was going to read. But, I'm just going to read a little portion of this because I want to leave enough time for questions here. This letter was written to a man named Spencer Brown, who was involved with the law. He wrote a book called The Laws of Form, and it was about what I can't think of it. What was the term? Okay, well, anyway, I was really delighted to receive your letter of the 13th. Immediately, I telephoned my publisher, and they will cable Alan Irwin, et cetera, et cetera. I'm reasonably sure they will take it. I assume you also know Joseph Needham at Conville and Caius. Some years ago, I had dinner with him, and we discussed, among other things, the development of binary arithmetic from the I Ching and the possibility of using ideographs with analog computers. How well do you know Chinese? I regard myself as not much more than a dabbler, but I'm always fascinated with it and have been through the whole Lao Tzu. Alas, I am the product of an English classical education in which we learned to despise mathematics. However, I have to some extent overcome this prejudice, though there are still some tight places in your reasoning where I feel I need parallel analogies to follow you. Nevertheless, I am amazed at the elegant simplicity of your language. The relations between mathematics and language are fascinating, and mathematicians seem to use English in a peculiar way. Your notes help out a great deal, but I think you should consider for the American edition an expansion of the notes in chapter, the two axioms, that we could do some extra commentary. So anyway, that was really, towards his death, he became very interested in the mathematics of that time with computers coming on, and he was worried about, though, how computers would affect our future, and there's a lot in this book about that as well. So I guess in order to give you 5 minutes at least to ask questions.
We have the whole until that goes to stop, and then
they can ask questions.
We have a few more minutes. Yeah. I just one of the things I want to say is that his philosophies have been so moving to so many people. How many of you have felt like your life has been affected, or you changed directions or something like that because of your experience of Alan and his philosophies? Yeah, quite a few of you. So That always touches me enormously. I love that that is so. He died in 1973, and I think he's more popular now than ever. And Facebook has numerous Alan Watts fan sites, and they're in multiple languages all over the world. And Joan and I hear from people from different parts of the world. And I love that we hear from teenagers as well as older folks. So he's far-reaching, and so if you haven't experienced Alan Watts, I would suggest that you find him on YouTube and listen to him, because he had such a beautiful voice, and people love listening to him. And I think he would love what's going on here. I think Alan would really be fascinated by the type of thinking that is creating what you all are creating. And so I think he'd be very happy to be here himself.
So questions?
Yeah.
If you guys have questions, I can come over to you.
Yep.
I'm going to just ask one quick question. What was his daily itinerary like, you know, or like in general, what would he be doing?
Well, generally he got up early, usually around 4 o'clock in the morning, and he would do his reading. He's a voracious reader. He was an incredibly intelligent man. You know, he went through the seminary in his 20s and became the chaplain at Northwestern University. And during that time, he mastered Greek and Latin. And and then, you know, his incredible interest in the Eastern philosophies. He knew so much about those. He was so well read. And it was literally 4 o'clock in the morning. He would be reading or writing. You know, then he would, you know, maybe we'd go to the beach for a picnic. Wine, bread, cooked chicken, cold chicken.
Any pet peeves he had?
Any what?
Any pet peeves he had?
Pet peeves. Well, yes, the pet peeves were the criminalization of various activities that he felt were the responsibility of the individual themselves and should not be penalized, like smoking pot or imbibing in certain things, you know, whatever it was, sexual things, etc.
He wanted the police out of the bedroom.
He wanted the police out of the bedroom, yes.
Yeah, that would be, yeah. I just want to say, too, that one of the things we say in the book, with all of his brilliance and all the wonderful things he did, his life was complicated, and he did turn to alcohol, vodka being his alcohol of choice, and he had quite a struggle with alcoholism. And the other thing was women. And one of his lovers, a wonderful poet, wrote that women were like catnip for Alan, which I love that phrase. But you know, when people want to know, you know, Alan never wanted to be put on a pedestal. He absolutely did not want any part of it. And so he would call himself the trickster coyote and things like that, just to get people to not expect him to be something up here, which then they would just knock off when they found out his humanity. So I think what's important is the effect he has on all the people, on all the lives that he's affected. That's what really matters.
He enjoyed parties. You know, we often had groups of people over that were totally fascinating. As children growing up with that, it was really interesting. You know, it was a gathering was always an opportunity for gaiety and philosophical discourse, which would go on at great lengths. And I think, you know, he led basically a very bohemian life, but very interesting. He had a gift for making his environment rich with little money. He, you know, beautiful objects that were found, stones on the beach, or blankets from Oaxaca, you know, just very basic, simple things, but very beautiful at the same time. And music, he loved music. So that kind of was surrounding the atmosphere in his living space.
So somebody has a question, yeah.
Hi there. First thing that I'd like to say is there's an interesting little list that I put together of these Alan Watts mixes online. You can look that up at seb.yt/Watts. And my question is, in this conference, earlier today, there were some discussions about prolonging life or perhaps ending the concept of death entirely. And personally, I disagree with this concept, but it's an interesting thing to explore. And I wanted to know if you have any particular insight from your father to calm perhaps the disquieting fears about death that may arise when you're faced with it so bluntly.
God, I don't think I understood that.
Can you repeat that, Kurt? Because I could. No, well, I'm thinking.
There's a lot of background noise, so it's really hard to hear.
You could put it right up. Yeah.
Is there anything that you would advise people to do, or any words that Alan would have to people who are disquieted by the concept of death, as was talked about earlier today in this conference?
So I think one of the things he says is to just relax, and that life is a game, and enjoy it, right? Really play and have a good time while you're on this planet. And he's written another fascinating letter in this book about death, in which he, in beautiful detail, talks about a very Tibetan philosophy of death. And so that death is not something to be feared, and so that's the best I can.
Yeah, I think he looked at birth as starting on this cycle and death as ending the cycle,
and there's more to come.
There's more to come.
Yeah,
I guess.
The next cycle. Somebody has.
Yes.
Speak right into the mic, please.
Is this good?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you're not too familiar with Alan Watts' works, but if there's anything, a lecture or a book that's had a profound effect on you, are there any books that come to mind that are particularly profound for you?
I think one of the more interesting books that a lot of people have read is called The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. It's a group of essays that deal with those types of experiences or, thoughts. The other one is Does It Matter?, which is man's interest in materiality. One very good essay in that one for this group would be the one about money. And then the clothing. There's an excellent essay on clothing in that book that I think everybody would enjoy.
The two books that he recommended the most were The Wisdom of Insecurity and Nature, Man and Woman. Those were the two that were, and Wisdom of Insecurity is actually the biggest seller to this day. Yep. Is that helpful? Good. Okay. Okay. Yep.
Okay, it was along the same lines. My question was is there any book that he continued to go back to over and over and over again, that you would see him, he would read it, and then a little while later he would go back and reread it? Was there any book that he just really kept and that was his favorite book?
I think possibly The Way of Zen. I know he initially in his 20s he wrote The Spirit of Zen. And as he gained more knowledge and more intellectual thought in the subject, I think he looked at The Way of Zen possibly as his best book on that subject in spirituality.
towards the end of his life, are you aware of anything he wanted to share with the world that he didn't get to finish or didn't get a chance to share with us? Is there something that you'll know that in that regard?
Something he didn't
Something he wanted to share with the world that he died before he could do that.
Something he wanted to share with the world that he died before he could share.
You know, I think he was terribly worried about the condition of the earth. I had tried to find one of the letters in there. I could not remember which one it was, but he was very into the ecology and how we were treating the planet, and had some warnings about that. And of course, here we are 50 years later or more, when he had written those things and been concerned about it, and look at what's happening now. And I think that that was one of the things that he was very concerned about, and didn't have obviously more time in his life. He died when he was 58, and you know, we're sitting up here at 75 and 80, so that's a long time. So yes, I think that that would have been it.
Yeah.
So, a question for
Put
those,
it right in front of your mouth.
Okay, for those who are familiar with Alan Watts's writings and lectures and speeches, is there anything that you feel that's appropriate to share, which is from your unique position and experience as family members? How was it in the real life, like in day-to-day life? Any stories that are appropriate to share? It's just very interesting. Beyond what we hear or what we read.
Do you have a particular story? I don't have I would say he was very playful. He loved to play.
Yeah.
He loved to dance. He loved to sing. And as a child, he was often not available because he was so busy with his writing and his lecturing and his, you know, traveling all over. But when he was available, he was really fun to be with. And yeah, just a delight in that way.
He had a very playful nature about him. And I think that for us at least, it made such a difference in the life that we had to lead, given he was such a public figure and it was gone so much, and you know, we weren't always around him, and so that was kind of the saving grace for us growing up.
He loved to draw. He loved to, and so Joan became an artist.
So
yeah.
Alan was clearly a proponent of being in the present moment, otherwise you miss the true essence and beauty of life. And we all, obviously, in our daily lives, plan for the future, set goals, and I'm personally a big proponent of law of attraction, attracting people and experiences into your world. How do you balance, or what would he say, or maybe you would say, to balancing the art of staying present and truly enjoying the present moment with planning for the future to create amazing things in your life?
That's a good question.
Well, that's the conundrum, obviously. I think he always felt that you needed to do what you loved, that doing other stuff that you didn't like doing and so on was not going to ultimately gain you anything. And that, you know, we as individuals need to figure out what it is that we can do that we love, and be able to at least make enough living to put food on the table. I think one of the things that obviously has gotten in the way of that in our lifetime at this point is the overabundance of things that people need or want or think they need and want. Like, who needs a 4,000 square foot house? Who needs a Lamborghini? I mean, yeah, it's fun if that's really what you want, but on the other hand, is it really what you need? And there's so many other things that can make you happy that you don't have to be striving constantly to get ahead and to get to the top notch, to get make more money. I mean, you can ask some of these people that are making millions of dollars, are they really happy? You know, are they really doing what they want to do? Are they able to? Are they having to constantly worry about that money that they've got sitting there? You know, that's, I think, kind of how he felt about it.
It's kind of like there's never enough. But I also want to add another side to that, and that is that there are certain things we have to do in life, and Alan has a videotape, actually, of work as play. Which is about doing the dishes fun, washing the toilet fun, making it playful, so it's not this drudge. And I think that's a great tape for people to see. You know, like how do I make those things that I have to do every day not drag me down? And so his solution was to make it playful. So, yeah.
Is there a particular joke he would enjoy or tell often?
Limericks. He loved limericks. The bawdier, the better. I don't remember them, but he remembered them absolutely. And there'd be these limerick contests over an evening. You know, it was fun.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Joanna. Really appreciate it. And just for folks who are looking to get a signed book, we are going to give out a book on the floor. So if you guys want, they'll be on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just might mention that there are lots of interviews that we've done online. You find them on, just Google them.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. It's very thoughtful. You want this thing back?
My new knees.
You can have it.
Creaking. Thank you. Was that all right, Kurt?
Oh, it was perfect.
Good.
People got what they wanted to hear. So.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's going to take off your...
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I know cybersecurity isn't the sexiest thing in the world to talk about, so I'll try to make it as interesting as I can with the dulcet tones of my Irish accent and as best as I can. So I gave the same talk this time last year at this conference, and I had the same opening slide, but the difference was it said Slack instead of Telegram. Because last year, 2017, phishing inside Slack was actually a huge problem. And if you're now a self-professed veteran and you've been in crypto for a year, you'll know that Slack was a big problem. You don't read about it anymore because we turned off phishing by being installed in so many groups across the platform. But of course, they migrated from Slack to Telegram, which is why I now have Telegram up here. But we're protecting over 1 million people in crypto across 1,000 Telegram groups. So my name is Paul Walsh. I'm the CEO of a security company called Metacert, which also has a sister company called Metacert Protocol, which is the project for decentralizing trust and reputation for the internet. So I built my first website in 1996 when I worked at AOL as a startup back in the 90s, where I was part of the team that helped to launch technologies like AOL Instant Messenger, 56K modem protocol, and a bunch of other cool stuff that went on back then. I work at the cross-section of cryptocurrency, cybersecurity, and chatbots. So I'm pretty passionate about protecting you from opening the wrong link and from you sending your crypto to the wrong address. So I see a world where you feel safe doing those things. Michael Turpin is going to give a talk tomorrow and explain to you how his friends actually lost millions of dollars through this attack vector. And I usually take these slides out of my presentation, but because it's actually on the increase again, I've decided to put them back in. They're the same slides I gave last year. So what happens is when you have a contract with T-Mobile or AT&T, it's very easy for a bad actor to pretend to be you for the purpose of getting your SIM card ported to their phone. So basically, they pretend to be you and they say, hey, I need a new SIM card. They get your phone number, which means then they log into Gmail or GitHub or Twitter or Facebook, where you've used your phone number as a password backup and recovery, and they gain access to your account. And if they do with MailChimp, you might think that actually that's not too dangerous, but if you're running a crypto company, it actually is. Because they'll log into MailChimp, pretending to be your company, send out an email to your 5, 10, 15, 20,000 community user base saying, hey, we've got a special promotion on right now. Come and buy our crypto in the next 24 hours or you won't get this discount. And of course, we're conditioning people into clicking links quickly in the crypto world because of this. And that's why so much money is lost. So going back here, last year, my Ether wallet actually had the same social engineering tactic happen to them. So when they reached out to AT&T and Twitter and said, hey, this is a problem, this is their response. It wasn't, how do we not do this? How do we not do this? It's, oh, I see you have problems porting your number. How can we help you? Send us a DM, we'll help you. So they're helping the bad guys. So my advice there is to go with the least of the two evils in this regard, which is T-Mobile. Because what you can do is you can call them right now and tell them that you think you're a high-profile target for people doing this and get them to put an extra lock on it. And that means then if you want to get a new SIM card, it takes 48 hours because it has to go through the fraud department. If you're with AT&T, you don't have that luxury. There's no way for AT&T to stop that, which means anybody can impersonate you. I personally believe it's actually insiders working for these companies, working with bad actors. In the blockchain crypto world, the biggest problem is not necessarily hacking, even though that's what you hear about in the media. It's actually phishing. A lot of the hacking actually starts with a phishing attack. So by the time you read this, almost $500 or $900 is lost in a phishing scam. So read it twice. Now, almost $2,000 has been lost in a phishing scam. Over 10% of all money raised in ICOs is stolen. And I'll show you some examples how this happens. Now, you might think that only stupid people fall for phishing scams, or lazy people, or silly people. They're not. Some of the smartest people in the world fall for phishing scams for different reasons. It could be because they're thinking about a loved one or somebody's sick and they've just clicked on the wrong link and logged into the wrong website because it looks like the right one. I haven't been to a single conference in the past 18 months where at least one person hasn't come to me and said, I've been compromised, either personally, which has led to the loss of money, or it's actually led to attackers getting into their network. And I'm talking about big crypto companies. So this is not a paint shop job. This is actually two real websites. One is real and one is fake. They look exactly the same. And this is a massive problem if you're in the crypto world. You won't know the difference. There's no point in me asking you, because both use SSL certificates. And here's the other problem. We're being conditioned into relying on this padlock, which is the worst thing you can do, because SSL certificates are free and they're automatically issued. Let's Encrypt is a service that provides free SSL certificates, which I think is an amazing initiative. I'll preface what I'm about to say by saying they're not accountable or responsible for phishing, but I do believe they should do more to make sure that to try and make sure that their technology is not used for bad. So Let's Encrypt has issued over 20,000 SSL certificates to domain names with the term PayPal in it. You would have thought maybe after the 4th or 5th or 6th or 1,000th SSL certificates, somebody might have said, oh, hang on, I think some of these might not be legitimate. There can't be over 20,000 PayPal companies in the world. So do not rely on the padlock, and please do not, if you run a community or you're a senior member of a team at a crypto company, please do not tell your users and your customers and your investors to click on the certificate to prove that you own the website. I've had these conversations with community managers with communities that are bigger than 20,000 people inside Telegram, and they're saying these things. So people are actually relying on this padlock and then logging into the wrong website because they're not looking for the other signals that are attributed to fake websites. The top one is a phishing site. You have a 50-50 chance. So we have a free browser extension called Kryptonite. We verify crypto websites and social media accounts. So when you land on a website, the shield is black. That means you should look for additional information to see if it's really that website or not. If it's a green shield, you know you're safe. If the website is compromised like it was with my Ether wallet, we have a back channel communication with a lot of these companies, so we found out straight away, and we changed the classification. So in our support system, we had quite a lot of people very quickly email us saying, why can I not access my Ether wallet? I need to send money right now. And my response was, you're welcome, with a link to a blog post that explained why. You seen a theme here? It's not all doom and gloom, but cybersecurity is a serious issue. I don't go for the fear, uncertainty, and doubt approach, but in the crypto world, a lot of founders and founding teams in the crypto world are basically building banks on beaches, smoking marijuana. They're building banks because they're responsible for so much of their own money, and so much of money belongs to other people. And they're not putting in place basic tools and techniques to protect themselves and their communities. So it's not just fake websites, it's actually fake wallet addresses. You could get a message with a link to a legitimate website, but a phishing address. So we have a service. I mean, the common theme here is you know you're safe when you see the green shield from MetaCert. This is a hardware wallet. It's the size of a credit card in my wallet. It has a secure Bluetooth to this mobile application. Works on both iOS and Android. When you copy and paste in an address or scan a barcode, it quickly checks MetaCert protocol before you technically have a chance to send your crypto to see if it's safe or not. And if it's verified, you get a green shield. And if it's not, you get a red shield and you're prevented from sending it. So we have about 25 integrations lined up with wallets and exchanges to help combat fraud on exchanges and phishing inside wallets. I've explained it, so I don't really need to show this, so I'll stop it halfway through. But basically, you copy and paste in an address, the shield is gray, and then it turns green. I know you're asking yourself, but Paul, what about email? What about my mobile phone? So this is a product that we're announcing is going into beta today. So the technology took about 2 to 3 years, well, 2.5, 3 years to build, and about $1.5 million. What I'd like you to do, if you're interested in signing up for the beta program, if you're an Android or an iPhone user, go to upnext.metacert.com, stick in your email address, and we'll give you a beta release. It's been alpha tested by creators and founders of companies and coins like Dogecoin and MetaMask. We have people at Apple doing some alpha testing, some heads of security at some big companies. So hopefully this will work. So basically what will happen is, oh, it's going to work. You get a black shield if it's a link that's unverified, a red shield for a phishing link, and a green shield for a verified link. And the reason this is important is because MetaCert has the biggest cyber threat intelligence system in the world. But even if you combine us and every other security company in the world, we cannot technically possibly stop every new phishing link that comes online every minute of the day. It's impossible. You could create a phishing link right now, and it'll get through pretty much every email security company. So if you get a link that purports to be PayPal, for example, and it has a black shield, chances are it's a phishing link that has not yet been classified. So you need to look for the green shield, so you know you're safe to open that link. So this is an email, this is actually a native integration. So that was not a MetaCert application, that was native iPhone mail. All it is a device profile. It also works on Android, it also works on Thunderbird, and it will very soon work on Outlook, Gmail for iOS and desktop. So pretty much every email client. Thank you very much. My name is Paul, and I'm from MetaCert. Oh, thank you very much.
The coffee, that can only be a good thing for me. You'll all keep awake. But this is going to be a very short presentation. I was asked, and thank you very much to the organizers here for asking me to come and speak. I was asked to speak on a project that we're working on at Immersive Entertainment. The project is called Virtual Universe. And so we get the honor of having fun every day, playing around, playing games, creating virtual environments. And part of what we're doing involves blockchain and cryptocurrency as well. So we're sort of on two edges of this innovative forefront. Need the clicker? Okay. Thank you very much. This isn't working. Yep. Ah, perfect. Okay. So it's an ostentatious title, The Role of the Economy in the Design of Virtual Worlds. And obviously with 5 minutes, I'm not going to be able to get in too much detail, but I do want to leave you with one important thought that we've come to as we design our virtual worlds, as we design our experiences. The founding team, just briefly, a lot of background in VR. Our COO, Bob Curtis, started out in VR many, many years ago, founded a company in VR some 16 years ago. Jeroen van den Bosch, who's a co-founder, storied career in gaming, launching several very, very successful titles, including a major community in Belgicom, selling that in Belgium, selling that to Belgicom. And myself, I got my start in the early internet, being one of the first web design and then application design firms in the world, and seeing the transition. And what I see today mimics a lot of what we saw in the early 90s with the internet, especially both in the VR and the blockchain space. So there's some lessons to be learned there. As I mentioned, immersive entertainment is involved in creating the ultimate experience in VR. What we're creating is more akin to Ready Player One than it is sort of a video game. This is a place that you can occupy. You can go in with your friends, you can socialize, you can play, you can have an apartment, you can play a role. But you can also start a business. You can exchange value with other players. And of course, there's gaming as well. So what really differentiates our strategy from other companies is that we're not looking to take the old and just translate it to the new. We're not looking to just create the next game that lasts for 10, 20 minutes and hold your attention for that long. We're interested in true engagement. And part of that involves being able to exchange value within the world. But some important lessons have come up as we look at the type of transactions that you can do within this world, which include, of course, selling items to one another. If you're a creative, you can create items for other players within the world. You can speed up processes. You know, all of this is par for the course for this type of game, this type of experience. But as we started looking at the design of the economy, we started wondering, are we taking principles from existing economic principles in the real world, and are we just simply applying them to VR? And I think those same questions could be asked of people in the crypto space as well. Let me give you an idea in this talk, and this is the one thing I want to take away. Information wants to be free. We've heard this for the last couple of decades. It's something that's espoused by hacker ethos. You know, the idea sounds fantastic. But what it's really led us to is a place where creatives, people who actually create value, are no longer getting paid for their goods. And when you consider this idea, it's being accelerated by the advent of AI. I'll give you a quick example. Translators who once got paid to translate, now we have Google Translate. Fantastic tool. And I'm not a Luddite. Love these tools. But where does the human being fit into that value chain today? The human being is being disrupted. Their job is being taken away and replaced by Google Translate. And guess what? To add insult to injury, the human being is being asked to train Google Translate each year because, of course, language is not static. So consider, before you design an economy, before you launch something based upon cryptocurrency or a new business, how is this economy going to be better than what we have in the real world? How are we going to correct some of the problems that we see in the real world? Because today that we know that we're driven by information, attention, and behavior that's basically exchange. Our energy is being exchanged. We are the products. We've heard that before, time and time again, with Facebook and other players. Again, nothing against the technology, but how can we do it better? And so these are some of the problems that we're trying to solve within the virtual setting. And this idea of being a slave to technology, let's not do that. Let's figure out what role human beings can play in what they want to do, what value they want to create and present to the world, instead of just serving the technology. What we see is a speed up of potential disaster, where cryptocurrency, blockchain will allow us to do things much faster, but if we take the way things operate today and we just speed them up, are we going in the right direction? So these are all questions that we have to answer. Why? Not because we're trying to change the world, but we're trying to create a valuable economic system within a virtual world, and we're trying to do it better. So at the end of the day, a couple of thoughts I want to leave you with. Platforms that we create have to leverage work and creativity, attention, and behavior. Absolutely, right? But they also must allow the user, the human being, at the center of these economic systems. In our case, the user at the center of this virtual universe, to build and leverage their own value. So what we propose as a company, and something that we're looking into creating, is a Bill of Rights. A Bill of Rights that centers around not only the user's privacy, but their ownership over their own data, their own behavior, their own attention, and the ability to leverage that attention and the work that they create within these virtual worlds so that they get something out of it, not just the platform. And we think that if we can do that, the platform is going to succeed beyond our wildest expectations, but we'll also have a very, very happy user base. So something to think about. Thank you. We are looking for a technical co-founder, by the way, in the blockchain space. So if anybody's interested, we'd love to talk to you. Come see me afterwards, or you can reach me on Twitter. Thank you for the time. Appreciate it. Great, thanks. Yeah, well, no, I just didn't have it at first. And then it wasn't playing, it wasn't working at first. No big deal.
And we all talk afterwards. We're like, and Ivan E. Lingham have been, we're not working. Nope. Okay, good. Yeah, so we've been angel investors in blockchain technology startups for the last couple of years, and I run a firm called Newton Partners, which does early stage blockchain technology investing and advisory on the token economics side. And we've been fortunate to have been investing in a couple of the early winners in this space. And through that process, we thought initially that we were investing in the foundational level of a new kind of monetary system. But what we realized as time went by is that in fact we were investing in businesses that were creating a completely different way of coordinating economic activity. You see, the story starts, for most people, kind of the beginning of 2017, and you have Chris Berniski, who starts talking about the equation of exchange and the fact that we're ultimately dealing with a new kind of conception of a monetary system, and this idea that you have a monetary economy, you have a real economy, and that you should in fact design your economy to reduce velocity. I wasn't very comfortable with that approach, and I felt like it was an oversimplification and ultimately would tend towards design which was focusing more on something like how to increase the price of your network unit rather than how to increase the value of the network overall. So we did some work on Forex markets and kind of looked at what were the drivers for fiat exchange rates in Forex markets, and quickly realized that if you account for the fact that crypto markets are ultimately pretty immature, and you remove those elements that are related specifically to debt and intra-project trade, that there really are 4 key drivers for value in a crypto economic design. They relate specifically to supply schedule, governance participation, network utilization, and unfortunately also speculation. And so we kind of have some of the principles behind crypto economic design, but we still don't know why are we even designing these things in this way. And it's my contention that, in fact, what we're doing is creating a different way of coordinating economic activity, one which extends everything that we know so far about business model design and enables us to create businesses that are much more scalable and have much lower overhead costs associated with them. And I'll tell you why. You see, many years ago, when we were organized into not much more than tribes and small towns, what happened is that we had a collection of buyers on one side, and every now and again you would have a seller that would come into market and sell goods to a captive audience. And so basically you had demand that exceeded supply, and the seller would maximize their economic surplus. We then moved forward a little bit to say the end of the Second World War, and you had a massive amount of production that had to be switched to producing consumer goods. And so you suddenly had the opposite be true, where consumers were able to maximize economic surpluses, and the advent of advertising to kind of increase the amount of people that were going to consume these consumer goods being produced. And then if we go across to the 1990s, we realized, well, actually, we had people on both sides of what ultimately became a two-sided marketplace. So you had the emergence of technologies that enable us to match buyers and sellers with each other and to use network effects, both same-side and cross-side network effects, to create more efficient markets. But what this meant is that the trusted intermediary was actually the entity that was suddenly capturing the value in that business model. And so what these new business models enable us to do is to organize buyers and sellers and to split up the role that was previously being performed by an intermediary, and to create a decentralized network that embeds these economic incentives and these network effects deep into the design of the network. But also, and perhaps more importantly, through mechanism design, which is a branch of economics that enables us to understand how to design economic incentives, what we can do is actually optimize incentives in order to increase the strength of those economic effects. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the projects that we've been working on and some of those that we've been advising and how we've applied some of these principles to that. Now, bear in mind that I only have 10 minutes, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I will talk a little bit about some of the principles and some of those economic primitives that we've applied to crypto-economic design. So the first primitive that we come across is the need for identity in a decentralized network. In this case, my business partner Vinny runs Civic, and Civic, essentially, we did an economic design for it that enables you to have 3 primary market participants engaging with each other in a decentralized manner, and ultimately able to solve a problem around how do you create reusable but yet validated identity. And so the design was a lot more than just how we're going to issue tokens, and I think that gives you a good indication of kind of how much more thought has been going into these crypto-economic designs, both in terms of how do you structure rewards, penalties, and ultimately stakes as well. Another project that was really important for us, and I thought that tested our thinking, was Tapatalk. And Tapatalk is a network of about 180,000 forums. It has an audience of about 30 or 300 million people across the world. And they had a very unique problem. And that was that declining advertising revenue in content businesses needs to be compensated for with other ways that you can monetize content. And another challenge that they had, which raised the new crypto-economic primitive, was that you ultimately needed a reputation system so that you could identify people who were creating high-value content, incentivize them to continue creating, consuming, sharing that content, but also enable you to enable peer-to-peer trade in that kind of network. And so we created a decentralized reputation system for Tapatalk. And why this is important in another crypto-economic primitive is because in trustless networks, reputation serves a really, really important function. What we also did was, in the Tapatalk design, is we implemented the first use of token bonding. And what token bonding effectively enables you to do is to isolate network effects and to create relationships between different tokens so that they feed liquidity into each other, and ultimately you can have multiple types of tokens in a fairly sophisticated economic model, which doesn't reduce the liquidity that's available in the network, but at the same time enables you to capture value where it is being created inside the network. So in token bonding, what happens is that you effectively have a relationship that exists between 2 different tokens and a supply and demand price curve which matches or enables you to determine at any point in time what is the price of the token according to that bond. Another project that we advised is Deep Defense, which is a cybersecurity protocol. And in this particular case, it reminded us of another super important crypto-economic primitive, and that was staking. And as our esteemed keynote speaker will tell you, what's really important in a crypto-economic design is to ensure that the market participants have skin in the game. So what we did quite intentionally at all different parts of the cybersecurity protocol work that we did for deep defense is to ensure that market participants have to stake in order to participate. And finally, a project that we've recently been working on, the Fan-Controlled Football League. And the idea here is that we had a couple of people who are ex-professional football players and tech executives, and they wanted to create a much more immersive sports experience. And the idea here was that they did a proof of concept in 2017 where they created an indoor football team that called the Screaming Eagles. And what the fans were able to do is to control what was happening both off the field and on the field with a specific team. And so what we've done is generalize some of those dynamics and created an economic system that enables them to create a league with 8 teams in it that will be launching in 2019, where almost everything that happens off the field and on the field will be determined by the fans. And so the fan economy that is embedded or part of the Fan-Controlled Football League has created a base layer protocol or token which is called FAN. And on top of FAN, we are able to issue tokens for leagues, for teams, and ultimately for players. And they all draw liquidity from the base layer token, but they also enable you to isolate economic value so that you are able to trade in the token which makes most sense for what it is that you're trying to do and where the value is being created for that activity. What we'll also do in these work type designs is to have a very specific use of the token in the network. So these tokens are not about enabling a medium of exchange kind of cryptocurrency, but rather something that is fundamental to the operation of the network. And so in the more advanced designs that we've recently done, we also have a mechanism for distributing inflation that arises out of the work function. So, you know, in a first generation protocol, you might have, say, Bitcoin that releases 12.5 BTC per block every 10 minutes. And the principle over here is kind of to do the same sort of thing, but in a way where we identify who is creating network value and distribute the new coins that are minted per cycle based upon that work. And we can extend some of these principles further as well. So the FCFL economy, for example, has got a very specific intention of engaging with projects that are outside of this economy, but nevertheless can make use of the FCL economy, such as fantasy leagues and sports betting services. So in closing, I think a lot of people are spending a lot of time thinking about, should we be issuing security tokens? And I think that we're missing an important thing here, which is that utility tokens, when designed and used in a way which creates real utility inside a decentralized network, is a very new and very novel and very scalable new business model that I really believe we should explore further. And in the work that we're doing, we're already seeing tremendous benefits coming out of that. Let's not get too fixated on doing security token issuances, and let's keep doing useful utility token issuances. Thank you.
you start to get on the sliding scale?
Investments went to zero, which was expected, but what was cruel about it was that the entrepreneurs were not able to get the capital. Women-led companies were starving, not able to fund themselves, and I just found it very disheartening. So my goal was to change the system, and just at that time I got lucky. And I'll tell you about how it worked, but I got lucky because the U.S. changed the laws, and we're going to be a recipient of an extraordinary new opportunity for entrepreneurs. So, first thing I want to talk about, what is the utility token? It turns out that about 2 years ago, people were issuing utility tokens to raise capital. And what are they? They're not really following what people are used to when they invest. They're not an equity, they're not debt. You're selling them before you have something real, so it's really a risk that people are taking because the system doesn't work. And if they're selling because they're not in existence, what are you going to do with those tokens? It's like going and buying Starbucks prepaid cards and there's no Starbucks to buy coffee with. It's just kind of a difficult system. And then people are using these tokens every time they issue them to use their application, but you may not need it. You could just use Bitcoin or ETH to use the application as well. Then what happened was Ethereum came out, and it was so easy to write a smart contract to issue a cryptocurrency, and that's called ERC20. Actually, I met the founder of ERC20 last Friday in New York and talked to him about what was going on, and he thought, wow, you know, people were so excited about his smart contract, so everybody was using it to raise capital. The problem is that ERC20 doesn't do anything. It just allows you to transfer tokens from one person to another. That's all it does. So when the word utility token is used, it's a misnomer. There's no utility. It's just a transfer token. And it turns out, if you look at blockchain companies like EOS, they issued a ERC20, and then they converted, once the blockchain was ready, into the real token. So in a way, it's a placeholder. A placeholder is an option. An option is a security. So what's a digital security in the end of the day? I mean, a lot of people talk about it, the security tokens. It's basically the same old thing. It's either equity in a company, it's debt in a company, it's a revenue share, a royalty. It's nothing really new. It's not a new invention. It's really boring in a way. But when you tokenize it, you allow the security that the financial instrument to have beautiful new properties. But the good news is that all the governance exists. So for example, if you own shares in IBM and you lose your stock certificate, if you had one, what do? You're done? You've lost your money? Or you go to the transfer agent and request a new one. So the company will issue you a new stock certificate. If you have a house that you own and you lose your deed, do you still own your house? Of course, you go to City Hall. So there's a lot of governance around it. So what are the types of things you'll see that are security tokens? You have real estate, so you can buy pieces of real estate, securities like a company, oil and gas, paintings. There's a company that is taking Masterworks paintings and they're tokenizing it. So how do you do it? So it turns out that the laws have changed, and then now any company is allowed to go raise money from the general public. Now, you can always go and raise money from venture capitalists. You can raise money from wealthy angels, but if you want to go outside of that group and you want to reach the 200 million people in this country that can invest, you need to follow regulation. And some of the things you have to do is audits, reviews. You have to make disclosures so that your investors know what they're buying and they know what the risks are. You have lawyers reviewing it. These are difficult things to do. This is not so simple. Like if you write a white paper, anybody can write a white paper, and any college kid can do it. So that's not a barrier in a way. So how does it work? Well, there are a lot of companies out there offering what we call security tokens, smart contracts. So I put a bunch of companies here. These ERC numbers, ERC, for those who may not know, it's an Ethereum request for comment. You're basically proposing a standard. That's how ERC20 was created. So these companies will help companies become tokenized. So now this is the big deal. This is a big deal. So a few years ago, the only way you can raise money is if you basically take your company public. And you can raise money from the general public. Now, you could always raise money from wealthy people and venture capitalists. But if you want to raise money from 1,000 people, 10,000 people like you see today with the utility tokens, you have to take your company public. That costs millions of dollars. And by the way, no one's going to do it for you because companies like Goldman Sachs are only interested in large companies. But here you have a whole change with the Jobs Act. Everything is different now. You can use Regulation A+, raise $50 million. Regulation crowdfunding, raise $1 million. Regulation D is, again, for wealthy people, but you can post it on the internet and advertise it. Regulation S for foreign investors. But the point is, you can do a lot today. And then there's these buzzwords that people use, SAFE, SAFT. There's all of these contracts that are available to you, but the most important thing is use a great securities attorney. That is so important. In fact, you have a bunch of great attorneys coming up on stage after me, and they are thoughtful. They understand how to help your business raise money, what paperwork you should be using, and how to structure a deal that makes sense for your investors and for yourself. And that's what's all available now. And then finally, there's a lot of things, a lot of details. Like I call it the plumbing of the business. There's the plumbing. The plumbing means you have to check who's the investor, where they come from, are they a terrorist or not, are they trying to launder their money into your company. You need to know who they are, and companies do that for you. They'll verify the investor, they'll whitelist, they'll make sure that everybody is good, so that you don't get into difficulties later. There's this idea of a bad actor, for those who may or may not know. Bad actor is someone who's had securities fraud in the last 10 years. You don't want them as investors. It's only going to create issues. So there are checks going on all over the place. All right. Here are some companies. I run Start Engine, so I'm on the list. But these companies like CoinList, TokenSoft, Republic, they actually help you raise capital. They help companies issue tokens or as securities, or they help you issue shares, debt, convertible notes. All those things are available. They do a great job because they are focused on this business, and they're willing to take smaller companies and do all the work. Now, one of the big myths in the business is how to raise money. With the ICO world, they did it the right way. They created a lot of pent-up demand. People who are doing this white paper ICO raises, they would go around the world looking for investors, coming to shows like this one, pitching their idea, getting people excited, and then finally the day they say we launch, bingo, everybody's buying, right? That was great then. That is not exactly today going to work the same way. However, it's the same concept. You need to market your offering to as many people as you can and get people excited about it. And when you launch, you'll have a lot of investors, and then other investors watch it carefully. They say, this may be a good deal. They read the financial statements, they read your disclosures, and then they make an investment. So the good news with the Jobs Act is you're allowed to publicize on the internet all this information. It used to be very restricted. Now it's possible. Once you receive all these investors, there's something that is not talked a lot about. It's called a transfer agent, a registered transfer agent. It is a company. It's a database. It contains all the information of the shareholders. So when I say you own a security token and you lose it, or you lose your private key or it gets hacked, did you really lose your property? Well, it turns out you didn't. Why? Because the transfer agent has the record of every single shareholder, their name, their address, their social security number. So when you go to them with a sworn affidavit and you say, look, I want my Ethereum address back. I want my security tokens back. And they reissue it. It's a big idea. It's not how the blockchain was created initially. That was not the idea. The idea was if you lose your private key or someone hacks you, it's done. But that's not going to be a big business. That's not going to allow the real consumer marketplace, the investors to feel comfortable making an investment in this business. So depending on the way you raised money, like regulation crowdfunding or regulation A+, you have a yearly reporting. And it's not how it used to be where you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a report. It's actually pretty straightforward, and you file it directly with the SEC. Finally, the biggest, most important thing is trading. It's not solved today. So what I'm talking to you today about security tokens is a great idea, except that we haven't solved how you trade them yet. There are companies who are out there building what we call alternative trading systems, ATS. There are broker-dealers, there are exchanges. This is all happening now as we speak. In the next 6 months, there will be tons of companies, broker-dealers, with those exchanges. And finally, these are some of the exchanges coming out: T0, Templum, Open Finance. There are many more, by the way. There are probably a couple dozen, and us as well. But it's really going in the right direction. So this is all I have to say. I really want to thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward, and thank you, Kurt, for doing a phenomenal blockchain conference.
How's everybody doing? Bored? Do you guys have room for a panel? Yeah? So out of all the panel or talks we had today, this one is probably going to save you closer to 300, 400,000 if you're doing an ICO. All right, and the reason why I say this is every 3 months or so, things change, regulations change. So the next panel is going to talk about how do you do an ICO, and is world minus US really the way to go? How many of you are comfortable or at least knowledgeable in the idea of world minus US token sale? Okay. How many of you don't know about this at all? Don't care? You want to talk about Kim Kardashian? So what happens in a token sale is you basically have two routes. You can go as a security, you can go as a utility, just like Howard was talking about the security side of things. And if you're doing a utility, you really have to have a strong case and have to pass the Howey test to ensure that you're classified as a utility and you can raise funds from everybody, even the person walking in on Santa Monica Boulevard. If you don't do that, then you're basically pushed into a small category of users or token buyers called accredited investors. And if you're not an accredited investor, you cannot really go to them and say, hey, please come fund or fund my project. So typically, founders would like to go the utility route. And once you're there, it's easy. The communication is easier. Advertisements are easier. Pamphlets are easier. You're not bounded towards some kind of a regulatory hassle. And if you go outside of the United States, which is Singapore, Taipei, China, Japan, Hong Kong, Korea, majority of the people out there are typically not going to hold your tokens for a year, which is typically what happens when you're on the security route. You have to hold your tokens for a year. In a volatile market, anybody is going to come up to you and say, like, hey, Kurt, how much discount are you giving? And I'll say, well, I'm giving 60% discount on the token. And then they're going to ask, what is the lockup period? And if I say the lockup period is a year, they're like, maybe no so. So the panel members who are going to come up are Zachary Fallon from Ketzel Consulting, but he's an ex-SEC counsel, and we are going to have Wendy Jackson from Deloitte, and we're going to have Justin, and we're going to have Mark. So why don't you guys come up? And we're going to talk about two specific areas, very specific areas, which is doing a utility token or a utility token sale world minus US. That means you're not touching the United States at all. You're just selling it to the outside world, just like EOS did. And what are the ramifications of it? And what are the tax implications of it? Does that sound good? Yes? They told me that they cannot speak their mind. All right, so whatever they say, they have to, tone it down. Is that correct, right? All right, and I'm the only non-lawyer here, so I can speak my mind freely, all right? How about we start with you, Zach? Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a couple of, what do you do and your background?
Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Fallon, and I am a securities law practitioner consultant. I co-founded Consult Consulting, which focuses on advising crypto-related companies on issues around securities laws, commodities to a certain extent, money transmission, those types of issues. We have an affiliated law firm, the name of Blakemore Fallon, and a bunch of other names. We stick with Blakemore Fallon. There's just too many names. And yes, so that's sort of the practice that I have. It's we started up in April. Prior to April, I was with the Securities and Exchange Commission for 9 years, and I worked in their general counsel's office and in the division of corporate finance.
Did you like it?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Why did you leave?
Honestly, I left because
There's money to be made outside? No. Sorry to give your answers.
in the securities laws, but in my experience were navigable, and I don't think that I was getting frustrated that people didn't really appreciate the downside of noncompliance, and I get it. There's certainly a moral hazard that exists when there's money being thrown at people. To have the courage to pump the brakes and say, maybe have a second think about it before taking it. And so I saw an opportunity to help companies. I worked at the SEC with small companies, particularly in the Office of Small Business Policy, where we've answered a lot of questions from practitioners and small companies, entrepreneurs on securities laws. And so I saw a growing need, an increased number of questions coming in on these types of issues. And plus, it's a fascinating space, and I love to sort of deal with uncertainties and function in uncertain areas. So this is sort of fraught with that.
You'll fit right into crypto.
Yeah.
Wendy?
I'm a senior manager for Deloitte Tax. I've been in the space for about 5 years. We advise all sorts of clients in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space on the tax implications of what they're doing. In the last couple of years, a big portion of our work has been helping people who are launching tokens. But we also help exchanges, cryptocurrencies themselves,
Thank you, Justin. So the first question I have is for Zach. Zach, if all the companies are going to go from a jurisdiction standpoint, go outside of the U.S., does that make SEC irrelevant?
In a word, no.
Okay, why not?
Because the jurisdictional reach of the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the securities laws rather, is much, there isn't necessarily, and there's some uncertainty in the case law, but from a statutory standpoint, there's no territorial limit to the application of the federal securities laws. They have interpreted through, the SEC has provided a safe harbor for the jurisdictional reach to basically when it's outside of, when there is no interstate commerce or there are no U.S. persons involved, and everyone, that's the one everyone knows is Reg S, and that's sort of a safe harbor that says if you do these things, then even though we may technically have jurisdiction, we'll sort of acknowledge that that is an offshore offering, and we won't regulate it as an offering that needs to be registered. Now that's just the registration aspect, so that just relates to Section 5. But you definitely need to, you can't ignore the Securities and Exchange Commission just because you're overseas. The downstream effects, the SEC will, the analysis as to whether or not something is a security or not exists at the time you offer it, and it will be a security whether it's in Asia or Africa or in the U.S. And so how the thing flies around, when it touches upon U.S. territorial jurisdiction in some way, then they will have...
right, but in this case, hypothetically, we have Kurt Kumar LLC being incorporated in Malta, and I'm only going to sell it to non-U.S. citizens. I'm not going to touch the United States. I'm not going to do ads in the United States. I'm not going to do any conferences in the United States. I'll be just outside of the geographical boundaries. I won't come to Hawaii or anywhere else. Do you still think that the SEC has a reach or some kind of a find some way to come after Kurt Kumar LLC?
No, I mean, if it's truly as you said, all those things are in fact true, then you don't really have much to worry about from the SEC.
So I see today where a lot of founders come up and say, like, we want to follow the EOS model. We want to do that. So I feel that just looking in the last 6 months, where companies are incorporating in Singapore, in Caymans, and are actually bypassing the United States because they're looking for a less arduous way of moving forward. They're like, we don't want to haggle with whether it's a security versus utility. And they're developers at the heart of things. They're not lawyers. If you look at any other technology, if I was a Java developer, I can wake up at 9 o'clock, build a web page, and I'm not involving a legal counsel. I'm not involving a tax counsel, and I can create my web page, and boom, I'm done. But specifically in the token sales side of things, we have this immense hurdle for the founder.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you can't avoid the potential that the federal securities laws will apply to what you're doing. And as I said, when I say that what I'm focusing on here is the thing that you're offering is if it is in fact a security, that is something that will follow whatever that digital asset is wherever it goes. And so you can be an overseas country, you can be an overseas entity selling to overseas people, and that's fine. That's pursuant to Reg S, assuming you're not doing directed selling efforts in the U.S. and it's an offshore transaction. Then you're fine from an offering standpoint. But that's just the offering. It doesn't affect the character of the thing that's there and that travels around in different people's hands. And so that's where you can run into trouble, or the people holding it can run into trouble. But I should see if.
Says that you're not going to use Reg S to evade registration. And there's guidance from back, I think, either 94 or 95 that kind of touches on talking about that. And then there's further guidance, I think, in a little later that talks about internet offerings and how they apply. And if you look at that and you talk about in the token concept, unlike typical equity sales, you are going to have a token that is sold and it's going to get listed probably on a DEX within 2 minutes. And even if it's not on a DEX, then it'll be on a centralized exchange very soon. And it'll almost immediately end up back in the US, which is exactly what Reg S deals with, is the flow not coming back into the US. And so there's a very strong argument that bottom line is any sale you do, it could be completely offshore. If those tokens come right back into the US, you've just done it to evade registration. And the answer might be, well, but from a tech perspective, we can't do anything about it. And the answer is, you can, you just don't want to, which I get. Like, right? You couldn't stop an exchange, right? Because an exchange, they have their private ledgers, it goes all over. You could block the transfer, but then that's useless. No investor wants that. So the answer is,
if you geocoded it, or if you did on the KYC and said, like, hey, as a United States citizen, you're not allowed to purchase these. And if the US citizen then goes around it through a VPN or to whatever to purchase it, are we still in, is the company still liable after taking all of those due diligence steps?
They can't willfully turn a blind eye. And I think maybe we need to take a step back, and we're sort of dealing with hypotheticals, but there are sort of practical issues within the entire industry, which is people are structuring their ecosystems and creating their tokens because investors want a token that will eventually have liquidity. So they're bending themselves into pretzels, going all over the world, trying to stop the SEC from having jurisdiction. That's going to be very difficult. If what you're really trying to do is you're trying to build an innovative tech project, and you're trying to get funding for that project, you can do so through more traditional ways. The idea that you're going to go to Malta and then you're going to sell tokens to a fund that you probably know is controlled by people in San Francisco, it's eventually going to come back to money is never easy. Money is never free, money is never easy. So at some point, the regulations are going to come to you, and it's how far do you bend yourself in order to avoid what is eventually going to happen.
I mean, the basic idea is that the securities need to come to rest overseas. And what that means is again, highly fact-specific, just like most things in this space. But what Justin was just talking about would be an example where it did not necessarily come to rest. And so the thing that, when I hear people talking about going overseas and there are U.S. company or U.S. persons who want to start something overseas, my general view is that at some point they're going to realize that the cost of avoidance is just greater than the cost of compliance. And I think people, generally, that could be like a slogan for the last year of what's happened in this space. You can spend all your money trying to avoid these things, but they're not going anywhere. And they're not going anywhere. So at some point, that cost of avoidance is just going to be greater than the cost of compliance. And it's better just to build with these things in mind from the outset.
Got it. I want to touch a little bit on the tax implication side of things. So I'll use Kurt Kumar LLC, but in my mind I'm thinking EOS. So, but pretend it's Kurt Kumar LLC, okay? How does the tax ramifications happen? And maybe Wendy, you can tell us or help us. What is the best practices there?
Yeah, well, I think there are really good parallels in taxation or for the IRS is similar to the SEC, which is just because you're abroad doesn't mean that U.S. tax rules don't apply or don't somehow apply to your business. So, if you have a foreign operation, if you own an interest in a foreign operation, that can still subject you to tax on that foreign operation. With tax reform at the end of 2017, there's now a second anti-deferral regime for controlled foreign corporations. The first one was called Subpart F, and that was based on passive income and certain types of disfavored transactions. And now with tax reform, when you've got controlled foreign corporations, you have what's called the GILTI regime, which is the Global Intangible Low Taxed Income regime, which essentially subjects controlled foreign corporations to a minimum amount of U.S. tax. It causes a full inclusion with an offsetting deduction that's only available for U.S. C corporations. So you need to have a good tax advisor before you go in as an investor or as a business person. You know, that goes to ownership, what we just talked about, but also where are your business operations? Because substantively, you know, where are you operating your business should follow where you are incorporated and say you're operating from. So there are a lot of strong parallels with the securities regulations, and that, you know, substance should follow form. We don't want the tax tail to wag the business dog in this case, and there's a lot of things to think about. One benefit, I'll just throw it out there, one benefit from the 2017 tax reform was a dividends received deduction that was enacted, and there's you know, interest holding requirements, a certain % interest, and there is holding period requirements. You definitely don't want to operate without a tax advisor, but there were some benefits for people who earn income from foreign sources.
All things being the same, would you prefer or would you recommend somebody here to go to Malta or to go to Cayman?
I would never, yeah. I would say that needs to be a business decision. I know the regulatory regimes are different. And
let's say it's the same across the board. It's the same company. Everything is the same. Woman founder. Well, there's an African American founder as well in there. Co-founders. Utility token. Would you say from a tax ramification standpoint, go to Cayman or go to Malta?
The answer is that the tax consequences should not be the primary driver of that decision. Malta does have a tax treaty with the United States.
Yes.
Cayman does not have a tax treaty.
Right.
And that is a key consideration in terms of whether or not you get permanent establishment protection, which is, you know, what level of activity is the threshold for causing a taxable presence. So there are tax things to think about in there, and you know, that has to be weighed along with all the other business considerations.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Justin and Mark, do you see founders come in your conversation? I know you do the legal aspects of it and not the tax side of it, but do you see founders coming to you from the angle, like, on the very first call, we need to reduce our taxes, can you please help? Do you see that happening?
It's usually us going to them and saying, you need to start thinking about what the tax implications of this, especially when you have situations like you have a fairly large team of marketers, developers, you know, founder levels that are being essentially paid in these tokens, and you're not setting up any sort of, you know, you're not giving them any sort of guidance as to what their burden is going to be once these tokens actually become worth something or vest. So it's usually, unfortunately, people coming to us and saying, how do I do a token sale? And the conversation is sometimes like this, and it was more like this about a year and a half ago. I have a really great idea for a token. And you go, okay, well, what's the idea? And they say, we want to raise $30 million. And you say, well, that's not an idea, friend. And they say, no, but we want to do it as a utility token because it's a decentralized, pick anything, a decentralized Facebook. Okay, so there's some utility. Okay, but you're selling to people because they think it's going to go to the moon. And the people who are giving you $2 million to start this are getting it at a 90% discount, and they're immediately going to dump it out. So it usually is people trying to avoid regulation, and then we don't even, in our firm, get past that point because we don't take clients like that. But when there is a token that's actually being provided, we push them usually to talk to our tax lawyers and come up with some structuring.
Would you turn down a customer or a client that comes up to you and says, I want to raise $30 million utility token, and not sign them on? I mean, is there, because sometimes financial retainership is also a consideration in taking the client.
So I think for me at least, so I've been in the space for a while and have seen a lot of bad actors in the space. So my goal with my practice and with what Carlton Field is trying to do is trying to get the space to mature and to adopt best practices. So in order for us to take a client, we vet, well, what are you really trying to do? Does your business model make sense? And oftentimes we find that there's no business model behind the goal of raising a token. So once we're confident that you're not just trying to evade regulation, that you're trying to create a product that's going to benefit the industry as a whole, at that point we can start working around, well, how do we do this in a compliant manner? But, you know, there's a lot of lawyers over the last couple of years who've made a lot of money giving bad advice to people who want to raise money, and it's eventually going to come back to them. So it's important, I think, to be the gatekeepers for the industry.
And I think one of the important things to try to do as an attorney is somebody comes to you and says, I want to do a utility token sale. The answer is there's probably ways in which you can structure a sale that is more conservative than other ways. And there's probably ways in which you can structure a sale that, I'll go the extreme example that frankly investors don't even want. But the bottom line is there's a way to structure it. There's a whole spectrum of different things that you can do with technology to actually create a utility token and to actually make it more appealing or less appealing, sell it in different ways, say different things. And ultimately it comes down to, sure, let's work together, but let's talk about how it is that you're going to go about this. And you know, I have a few ways that I'm comfortable with. And anything else, the answer is that doesn't work, and so we're not going to do it.
You know what my test is if you go and explain to me your idea and you say you need a native token, and I ask you the question, can you create the same platform but charge Bitcoin instead of your native token, and the answer is yes, it becomes very difficult, I think, to call that a utility token.
Got it. Two things you would recommend, we can start with you, two things you would recommend founders who are here and say do A and B, and two things you don't want the founders to do.
I don't want them controlling a Telegram channel without very clear guidelines of what they can and can't say.
So the founders should not control the Telegram channel?
Well, I mean, they shouldn't be making promises in a Telegram channel without the token
That's
value.
one. Things not to do?
Yeah, and I think the thing to do is find a lawyer, make sure you vet that lawyer, and make sure that if you, test them out. Ask them, if I paid you $50,000 for you to write an opinion letter saying that this isn't a security, and if they say yes, then you should find a different lawyer.
Got it. I was going to say, like, how do I vet a lawyer, but I'll pass. So you didn't tell me, so you said one thing not to do and one thing that you should do, which is obviously get a good legal counsel. Can you give me another one of thing not to do in your opinion?
Yeah, don't design a business whose main function is to raise capital, right? So spend a lot of time on the business model and figuring out what the problem you want to solve is. And I would say at that point you're in a good place.
Got it. Are you for utility or security?
I mean, I think if you want to sell a security and you want to raise capital...
No, personally, like, what do you mean?
I am for Bitcoin and very little else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Two things, Mark, that you think founders should be doing and two things they should not do.
I think the first thing is figuring out compensation in tokens and how they're going to do that right up front. Because if they don't, they're going to be screwed from a tax perspective.
So compensation structure, okay.
Compensation structure right up front on the tax. And then on the legal side, I'd say don't just go form an offshore entity and think that you're good, because you're not.
Okay.
There's different ways to do it, but don't just think that going offshore is the answer.
Got it. Let me just drill down right there. Which offshore jurisdiction you think is better?
I'm going to say here are a few that work. Malta, Cayman might work. Switzerland might work. Then I'm going to say, but this is going to be driven by your specific tax situation. But all of those jurisdictions are good. I would prefer not to use Malta, and the simple reason is as a business, if you're really growing a business, you are going to receive way more scrutiny as a Maltese company than you are as a Swiss or Cayman company. And I'd probably go towards the Cayman more than Switzerland, because the Swiss are going to rip you off.
Got it. But even though, and you're saying that even though on the tax implication side of it, Malta only has a net 5% tax, but Cayman gets you to up to 20.
The answer's, that's the simple answer. The answer is going to be who owns the company, what are the percentage ownerships, what's the structure other than the Maltese entity. There's a whole lot of complications that go around that mean that you can't just say Maltese 5% is the answer, because it's not necessarily.
Got it. So upfront compensation structure, and don't go about just diddly-dally foreign corporation. And are you personally utility or security? What do you lean towards?
I am, frankly, I invest in utility tokens.
Okay.
But in terms of representation, frankly, I just want it to be compliant. So let's structure a utility token properly.
Yep.
That's fine with me. Or let's sell a security. Whichever one, I just want it to be compliant.
What's your top 2 favorite utility tokens?
Really?
I'm just asking.
I love all of my clients' tokens.
All right. Wendy, 2 things founders who are here who are thinking about a token sale, 2 things they should do and 2 things they should not do.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and echo Mark. I think you need to get tax advice as you start to have your business structuring conversations. Certainly, as you are thinking about going and signing any documents, if you're thinking about going and doing a raise, you need to have tax advice up front, and that includes compensation, that includes where you're going to launch from, that includes where your IP might be. And in terms of what not to do, you know, tax is sort of ambivalent about, you know, there's just tax consequences to what you do for your business. And truthfully, we have seen launches take place in a variety of ways with different tax costs, but it was, you know, in a lot of cases, the right thing to do for their business. So what we stress is, you know, get your advice, eyes wide open, and, you know, you'll find the right fit for you.
Got it. And personally, do you lean more towards security or utility?
I don't have a preference. Yeah.
Come on. Okay, top two utility tokens that you like.
Yeah, I'm gonna pass on that one. They're all good. I don't want to play favorites. That's not fair.
We're not recording it. You know, don't worry about those cameras. They're not recording anything. All right, Zach, what do you think? 2 things founders should do and 2 things founders should not do.
Well, 2 things being get a securities attorney and get a tax professional to help you.
Yep.
At the outset.
Yep.
That's just a no-brainer in my book. And what not to do, don't, sort of echoing the Telegram thing, be very careful how you're communicating to your audience.
Okay.
Communication's very, very thorny, a lot of tripping hazards.
Give me one thing I should not be saying in my Telegram. Should I not say, buy this token now, in 3 days it's going to get 3x?
Yeah,
correct?
don't talk about your company. Talk about what you're building. If you're truly building something, talk about it. Don't talk about this thing as being a great investment opportunity. That is just ridiculous, frankly. Don't talk about that stuff unless you're willing to say it's a security. If you're going to say it's a security and you're doing that on Telegram, then you're already in the land of 506C. And so just embrace it, sell to accredited investors, and consider the thing a security.
Got it.
And that's fine. That's not a bad thing. But just, you know, if you don't, and you're out there doing this thing already, then you already screwed the pooch.
Yep. Okay. Do you lean towards utility security?
I don't lean towards one or the other. I'm sort of agnostic. I love the idea of people building utility tokens. I have yet to really see many examples of that. So my default is I look at this from the lens of the securities laws, and so that's where I tend to see the super vast majority of these things falling. Many times because of the activities of the founders or the promoters, irrespective of the things they're trying to build. The one other thing I would mention to be very careful about is who your investor base is. I think the one thing that I've seen a lot of people, the mistakes they make is they take easy money from investors who ultimately have a different agenda than the company. And too often do I see the investors putting pressure on companies to do things with respect to liquidity or with respect to the way in which to capitalize on this investment they've made, such that the company is not ready for that, and they're not built for that. They're trying to build a company that has hopefully some utility. And what ends up happening is the investor base are doing things that are very different. Your interests are not aligned all the time. So just be highly cognizant of that, who you're taking money from.
Got it. Final thing that I wanted to give out to audience members is, are you guys giving 50% off discount on legal fees? I'm just asking, you know, I'm promoting you guys. I'm saying like, hey, here's a good offer.
I'm on the phone all day with people, and you know.
So you're saying yes, 50% discount?
I think if you call me, I will talk to you, and I won't charge you for talking to me.
100%
Now, will I be able to
discount.
help you and provide legal advice? No, because that would sort of be in violation of the bar rules. But
all right, well, here's another one. Because you're from the SEC, you know how Elon Musk got charged, fined 20 million, 40 million,
Okay.
20 million, I think.
20 million for the company, 20 million for him.
Right. So where does that money go? When the SEC gets that check, where does that money go?
Well, it goes to different places. I don't know the specifics of where that money went. There could be, because I just don't know the case. I haven't read it. That's what I mean by that. Oftentimes, the SEC, what people don't realize is the SEC is self-funded. So perhaps some of that money is going to fund the agency. We don't take money. Like I still work there. The SEC does not take money from the federal budget. It's sort of self-funded, and I don't think people appreciate. People don't really, people don't often appreciate that the way in which they police is through regulation.
Got it.
The way in which they fund themselves.
I was almost going to tweet and say, hey, SEC, rather than taking that 40 million in cash, why not just tell Elon Musk to go build $40 million worth of solar panels in Puerto Rico and then, do it that way. But I kind of get your answer from there.
Yeah, and I'm a little dated on the self-funding thing, so maybe a lot of stuff's happened in the last few years, so maybe that changed. I can't remember. Cool.
And are you guys here to help out the founders if they have any questions?
Yes.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for enduring and taking my questions.
Can I just say, I love the event you put on, the one in Alameda on the Carrier, and this one. What great venues. How do you choose your venues?
It just shouldn't be called Hilton. And or that's it. Hilton. It shouldn't have Hilton anywhere in their name. All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Those are
You guys?
Pretty far. When we started off
I
as
don't know,
a
maybe
traditional
like
product
Kurt
with 3
said,
million
like, whenever I'm
users,
ready to
which
start.
is like head and
But
shoulders
maybe I should
above
say like, hey,
everything.
everyone's welcome, and then
we have VC funding.
yeah, I guess the cue would be like I'm ready. I'll just say I'm ready for the screen share now. Okay, I'll give a thumbs up. Okay. Okay. Hello, hello, testing. Can you guys hear me? Hello, hello, testing. Hello, testing. Oh, hello everybody. So thank you everyone for being here at BLOCKCON. It's a pleasure to be here. And despite the crypto winter, it's great to see so many faces out here that are still very passionate about blockchain and the technologies and the products that it can enable. So we've been really working hard, and we're really excited to be announcing official public launch of our product here at BLOCKCON. And in doing so, we'll do a quick demo and then walk through the rationale and the history behind this product. So our product made by our company WeTrust is called Spring, Raising Crypto for the Greater Good. It's a crypto fundraising platform for nonprofit organizations. And let's just go through it real quick. So once you come to our website, you'll be able to see a lot of great organizations. If you find one that you like, let's say Open Library, they are digitizing the world's books. It's part of Internet Archive. And let's see what they have here. Some latest donations. You can join their Discord channel and talk with other fellow supporters. Okay, let's say I want to donate. I want to donate using MetaMask. I'll donate 0.1 ETH. There's some terms and some estimated fees. MetaMask will pop up. And to make this quick, we'll make gas price a little bit higher. Confirm. This is interesting. So there's Claim Your Shiba. So what we've done here is we want to make donations and this whole process of donation is much more fun and engaging. And so what we're doing here is people who donate will be able to collect a digital collectible, an NFT, as to commemorate their donation so that they'll be reminded of it in the future, 2 months later, 3 months later, and it's forever, right? So you can pass it down to someone else in the future if you like. So right now, we just saw confirmation on Etherscan, and this now has shown that there's this nifty Shiba. And so I can claim this NFT token. Another MetaMask notification will pop up, and I will confirm that. And now you see that it's processing the Open Library version of this NFT token. And once I receive that, it will show up here in Etherscan as a NFT called WTOA, a WeTrust Token of Appreciation. And we think that in order to improve engagement, we're also incentivizing the nonprofits to make more frequent updates on the progress of their work, what they're doing with the funds. And so your little cute NFT will also grow from a baby to a teenager to a fully grown adult. So that's a quick demo of the product. We're really excited about making donations on blockchain much more fun, engaging, because we know that, as all of you know, ICOs has been the first killer app for blockchain. Fundraising is the killer app, and we believe that it's a lot more than just for startups and tech companies. It can be much more than that. So with that said, I'll give a quick overview of the overall project and our greater motivations and some more details. So We Trust Spring crypto fundraising platform for nonprofit organizations. We know that about $300 billion of wealth has been created over the past year through cryptocurrencies. And we know that early adopters are very strongly mission-driven. They have causes and beliefs that they want to support. And in our surveys and discussions with folks, 75% of cryptocurrency holders want to donate to charity. They're just looking for the right ones, and they're not really sure. Because there are some that have already really appealed to cryptocurrency folks that are well-known and do accept cryptocurrency, but there's a lot more out there. We know that Fidelity Charitable received $70 million in 2017 in cryptocurrency. Pineapple Fund has also made a splash by donating quite a bit of their Bitcoin anonymously. So we know there's a huge market for this. Overall, globally, over $400 billion are donated to different kinds of nonprofits, and we think that crypto has some different kinds of advantages. One, it's a global audience, less hoops for payments. The crypto community, as we know, has a strong ethos, and there's transparency in the payments and receipts. And in the future, we want to build in greater governance on how these funds are used, especially for less trusted organizations. Right now, we're focusing on well-known organizations, but in the future, as this expands, you might see governance being more and more important. And lastly, clear records for tax receipts and so forth. These are just a few of the advantages of crypto fundraising. But not only that, we want to really help nonprofits rethink the donation process. Right now, it can tend to be very transactional. You donate, and you get a boilerplate letter that everyone else gets, and it's not very engaging. So not only are we making this platform very simple, where you can donate Ethereum, we're also wanting to make this place very engaging. So we know that a lot of crypto projects have large Telegram groups where people talk about different things. We think that same thing can apply for nonprofit organizations, where supporters can engage with each other as well as with the organization itself. And we want to make it fun and inspirational. There's a lot of innovation with NFTs. Token of appreciation is just kind of the start. And we want to see, we're doing some research and seeing how this can evolve further. We're working with some great organizations, actually. We've partnered, this is a sampling, ranging from the very well-known, such as Rainforest Trust, to Code for America, Open Library. And we wanted to have a diversity of organizations that cover many different types of philanthropy, but we also wanted to make sure that there are a lot of organizations that appeal to the and resonate with the crypto community. That's why we have Fight for the Future, which is about a lot about privacy, and Code for America, which is doing a lot. Right now, their focus is on Prop 65, I believe, helping people who have convictions related to marijuana get those overturned based on the new laws that have been created. So if you guys see, if you guys have organizations that you believe that the crypto community would really like to support, please contact us, nominate, and introduce, and we'll try to get them onto our platform. We already talked about token of appreciation. We think this can make it more fun. So where's Spring headed? Right now, it's a very simple platform, as we discussed, as we did through the demo. You go there, you learn about some organizations. Why is this? So this has been going all along. Let me see. Okay, so, all right, that's okay. So why isn't this updating? Okay, so it's just a little bit slow. So right now, our organization is responsible for governance, so we choose the organizations that are on the platform, and we make sure that they are legitimate 501c3s. In the future, we want this to be more governed by our token holders and the organizations that are already on the platform. TCR could be one of the ways to manage that. Right now, all of the organizations on our platform are very trusted. They do annual filings. Now, as we evolve in the future, we may need to have more governance tools in place, especially if it's a new organization or a one-person organization that has no track record. So speaking to that, we are doing some research on a token creation registry, which allows the organizations that are on our platform, as well as our token holders, to help make sure that everyone is abiding by a set of rules that we create. In addition, right now the platform is centralized, but in the future we want to make this more and more decentralized. And as I said before, right now we're restricted to US-based 501c3s, but we do believe that this should be eventually open to not only organizations, but individuals and organizations all around the world that may not have a presence in the United States. So to sum up, I have one big ask for everyone. Try out our product, give us feedback. We'd love to see how we can continue improving this product. And you can raise money for your cause, donate to your favorite causes. We are also looking for donation matching partners, whether a corporation or a project wants to partner with us. We'd be really interested in talking with you guys. And lastly, we're looking for additional nonprofits to join our platform. So if you have one that you think could be a good fit, please reach out to us. And thank you for your time, and look forward to seeing you guys on the platform. Thanks. Hey. How's it?
Smiling guys who are going to come here. So just keep in mind that at the end of our session, which is going to be in like 30, 45 minutes, we're going to move the chairs so they can bring the Tesla all the way up to the stage. And they're going to talk about hypermiling, how hypermiling actually applies to founders, and what are the things and lessons you can learn from hypermiling. So if you guys don't mind, just be aware there'll be a Tesla coming at 90 miles an hour from there. All right. And how are you guys doing in the back? Are you guys able to hear now? Because I think there's less disturbance in the back. Yes? You guys can move up. Say that again. Thank you. You guys are awesome because you guys came. Everybody kept saying this is a down market, Kurt. Why are we doing a conference? Let's cancel it. I'm like, this is the right time to do it in a down market, because at least I know who's not a momentum attendee. Right? All right, so I will invite Reese up because he has a panel up. And, yep. And this is the AI plus blockchain panel, so I'll let them take it away.
Go for it.
And I'll facilitate. All right, no pressure. It's the last panel. Everyone's beer, and the topic is blockchain and AI. So this should, there's no pressure. Let's just make sure that we get good energy going here. The format for this one is I'll do some quick intros, and then there's some questions I've put together that we'll go across, and everyone will get a chance to chime in on. Quick intro to myself. I'm Ariel Jalali, co-founder, chief strategy officer at Sensei. We are the makers of Sense. We are quick plug, launching a very exciting decentralized messenger. You can get it at sense.chat or find one of our awesome team members. There's Eli, and there's Harley, man, and Rebecca's floating around here somewhere. There she is, there's Rebecca. So if you guys want to get on our special VIP list, these are the people that'll help you make sense. Without further ado, outside of co-founding Sensei, I teach a course at UCLA on business applications of artificial intelligence. So I've recently gotten very much in tune where the rubber hits the road for these technologies and looking at practical traction for them. So this is an exciting panel. We'll kick off with quick intros. Reese, take it away.
Hi, I'm Reese Jones, and my background's in biophysics and brain research, and I helped start Singularity University, and mostly what I do these days is venture capital.
Nice.
Craig, I'm the founder of Numerai. Numerai is a hedge fund that crowdsources machine learning from thousands of quants around the world, machine learning experts. And we recently announced a new decentralized data marketplace called Erasure.
Hi, my name is Martin. I'm a mathematician by training with a background in quantum finance. I currently serve as CEO of Morpher. We're building a trading platform on the blockchain that empowers its users to trade virtually any asset in the world with zero fees and perfect liquidity.
Nice. So we have theoretical representation, thought leadership, and very practical marketplace type action as well. It's a good panel. We start off with a pretty broad question. These two technologies have sort of grown up simultaneously, and in lots of ways, the venture market can kind of hold only one hot technology in its mind at any given time. So unfortunately, blockchain has come. It's kind of the new shiny thing. The first question I have, and first person to jump in, we can discuss this collaboratively, is in terms of the scope of the projects. So in AI, the projects that are getting the most traction are very narrow applications. So for example, something that can 10x the productivity in mining or fisheries or things like that. And in blockchain, by contrast, it's not the narrow scope things that people are going for. They're going for these big moonshot type of projects. How do we reconcile the scope of these types of projects versus very narrow and focused versus large and ambitious and fat protocol level ambitions?
Well, one thing is AI needs to specialize to work commercially. And so you can have a grand ambition, but to actually deploy a commercial product, you have to make it very specific to a task. And largely because AI is funded by traditional venture capital and by large corporations, and they don't want, when they hear shooting to the moon, they hear expensive, high budget thing that may not work. And so the ambitions of the blockchain related companies partly comes, I think, from the financing side of things, where people want to invest in a grand vision, and where the rubber meets the road is, can you implement it, like, outside of Bitcoin? Is there any application built on a blockchain that is affecting more than 1 million people?
Not yet. Soon.
So that's not a very grand ambition.
True. So you think it's a function of funding source? Interesting theory.
Partly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you're doing a blockchain project, and you're trying to get consumers to invest in an ICO, you need to have some kind of consumer story. But blockchain maybe isn't a consumer technology. But if you're an AI company, you can actually, because you're already really pitching to VCs, or you're pitching to more sophisticated customers, you can probably going to have a more boring pitch, even though your technology might be stronger.
Yeah, I think it's in the nature of the beast, or in the nature of the beast in this case. I think that AI is still very, very early. I know that common sense is that blockchain is also very early, but I dare say that AI is at least an order of magnitude more complex than blockchain. Blockchain is essentially just a way to store data. Not the most efficient way, but it comes with other perks. While, yeah, the state of AI is, I think, still very much in its infancy, which is also why the projects are so hyper-focused on just getting one aspect done. I think we can all easily judge how far we are away when we try to have a meaningful conversation with Alexa or Siri or whatever.
Right. So I wanted to pick up on something that, Richard, you mentioned about consumer, is it early for consumer, right? And one of the considerations in consumer applications is this issue of data ownership, right? And coincidentally, good training models for machine learning need a significant amount of data. Not as much as they needed before, because there's, self-directed cycles of learning, but still some data, right? There's a whole debate out there about, who owns user data, how it should be used, how we should treat it in terms of privacy. So the question I wanted to pose is, for example, Facebook terms of service, the very first line says you own your data, but there's no practical thing that a user can do with that data from Facebook. Can blockchain help here in some ways to sort of keep the accounting and the respect for user data a little bit better than the way it's being kept now?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the most exciting applications of blockchain going forward. Identity on the blockchain, that users are really in control of their personal data. At the moment, it depends more or less on where you live, whether or not you're in control of your own data. So regulations around data and identity are much more strict in the EU. You have the right to be forgotten. You can reach out to the company to delete your data, and they have to comply. That's different in other parts of the world. But I believe the ultimate solution to this problem will be one day identity on a blockchain, and I'm confident that this will solve the problems that we face today with Facebook and other companies.
Any considerations for marketplace? Like, who's the original owner of the data that powers these models that you guys have?
Sorry, what do you mean?
Yeah, he said you guys have a marketplace for data models, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. So what I think blockchain is the right solution to this. Our decentralized data marketplace, every time someone uploads data to it, none of that data will ever reach our servers, and that's confusing for a lot of people. But really cool when you get it. And so you contribute some data to Erasure, you stake NMR tokens on it. None of that data comes to us, it goes to IPFS, and the stake itself happens on the blockchain, so it's sort of like a portable thing. Like you can tell everyone in the world, look, it's on the blockchain, I've staked this much. You don't have to trust numerized servers or anyone's servers. So I think that's definitely a nice direction that things are going.
Same question from a humanistic standpoint. How do people feel about the value of their data? And we ran an informal survey at the company, and we found that over 70% of the people didn't know that they owned their Facebook data. So that's a big psychological challenge. Will these systems sort of help value that a little bit better?
Well, so Facebook's terms of service says you own your data, and GDPR says similar sorts of things. And it doesn't say that they don't have a copy of it or that they can't monetize it. And so one of the things to think about is Facebook and Google have a lot of tens of thousands of engineers who mine and organize the data, and another tens of thousands of engineers who figure out how to display ads against where your attention is going to be. That has little to do with the data itself. And so the data, saying that I own my data that is on that system, is also like saying I own my credit report, or I own my criminal record, or I own my medical history, where this is data about me that I was involved in it being collected, but it isn't necessarily that valuable to own that data because the value in the data doesn't come from who owns it, it comes from who sells it. And so selling the data, as a credit report company sells to credit card companies and mortgage companies, the selling process doesn't have to do with who owns it, it has who has the right to sell it. And so if they're selling your data about you, that even legally for various reasons people say, well, you own that data, they're still not obligated to give you any money for their selling effort. And if that data were on the internet, nobody would know to buy it. And even if they bought it, they wouldn't know how to advertise to it or how to reach you or how to monetize it. So it's sort of like if you have a box of photographs from your life, a shoebox in a closet, well, you definitely own that data, but nobody's going to research it and nobody's going to advertise against it. And so the thing is putting your personal data on a blockchain or on the internet, if it's not part of a service that is in the business of organizing it and monetizing it, it's not going to be worth very much to anybody, including each of us. And so the service, in a sense, that Facebook or Google is doing is saying, well, if Pepsi says, I want to send an ad to all the people who like Coca-Cola, please find those people for me and deliver the ad. And so it's not just a function of the data itself, it's finding the people that have a particular characteristic and then figuring out how to communicate with them. And that's a really hard problem that requires a lot of talent. And actually it's the bulk of their business. The data collection and storage itself isn't that important. And so there's a distinction between data about me and data that I own. And there are perhaps thousands of companies and governments and so forth that have data about each of us, and theoretically maybe we own it, but we can't change it, and they can sell it. And so it's a little bit of a confusing thing to think that just by owning our data we'll somehow make money from that. Now Google and Facebook could choose to send some money every time they use your data. And another way to monetize your data is to buy stock in those companies. So if they do better by selling it, you earn returns on that stock.
That said, Facebook makes upwards of $8 billion a quarter on your, that'll be a heck of a large stock appreciation to recoup. So that's an interesting point, this question about what is the best way not to be evil? Or said another way, what is the best way to be good around this topic of data? And so the question I wanted to pose next is one of system of record. Can the blockchain keep AI honest and not evil?
Yeah, I think it can help with that. I think AI is supposed to draw conclusions from data that it has been presented with. And blockchain can actually help any system, be it human or artificial, to validate the information that it queries and that it uses for decision-making processes. So basically you can maybe introduce via blockchain a system of trust for an artificial intelligence that they can say, okay, yeah, this information is true because it has been audited, it has not been tampered with, which might not be the case for other inputs. So yes, I think blockchain can help AI.
Yeah, with Numerai, we have all these users building machine learning algorithms, and they could potentially submit trades to us that are scary or wrong, and so in a way, so we make them stake tokens before they do that. So that's a way kind of forcing them to be good actors, and if the AI is bad, then it's like the humans can destroy the AI's stake, if you think about it like that. So that's kind of how Numerai works, and how Erasure, the data marketplace we're making, will work as well. There's always like this kind of like stick in the staking, being able to burn the stake.
Mm-hmm. And it may have a double benefit, as you stated, because not only does the staking provide for quality, but it could also provide a form of proof of ownership. Right? Yeah. Because you've got the timestamp, you've got a wallet. It's pretty, ironclad. It's funny that, when humans do favors for each other, like I'll just remember, Richard did me a solid, and I might keep that in the back of my mind and buy him a beer someday. But as we get into more autonomous systems, they have no concept of morality. So they have to keep track of things in a much more systemized, recorded on a ledger kind of way. So be interesting to see, in a lot of ways, is it possible that sort of, rampant AI is this foreshadowed evil, right? Skynet. But is the blockchain a means to sort of rein that in? So before it turns into full-blown Skynet, you're like, okay, well, this group of AIs just invaded Poland. History tells us that that's not necessarily a good thing. Will we get some early warning in that scenario?
I don't know. I don't think that the blockchain actually can provide AI with an ethic, if it ever comes to that. I only think that it can help to provide the AI with drawing the right conclusions, like correct logical deductions based on true information.
So truth and proofs.
Yeah,
basically.
correct. Yeah.
Got it. Now, leads us to our next thing. So both technologies have sort of in their infancy figured out their key trick, right? In the case of blockchain, it's consensus, right? In the case of AI, with respect to learning, it's backpropagation of data. And so these two areas are still in their infancy in their respective disciplines. So they haven't figured out the best way to do backpropagation. They haven't figured out the ideal consensus mechanism. The consensus mechanism that works in Bitcoin may or may not work depending on how long chips can do that kind of work for. Now, there are new staking mechanisms. But the question is, can we, is there some relationship between this problem of consensus and backpropagation that in looking at multidisciplinary style of things that we could maybe solve two sets of problems with one set of thinking?
Well, one of the things about blockchain is once the data is recorded there, you can't change it. So it's immutable. And so that's inconsistent, say, with the European law about the right to be forgotten. And if the AI is learning from these immutable records, it'll maybe have learned about you in ways that you might presently find undesirable. But the information is already there. And outside of the activities in the U.S., one of the largest deployers of AI related to people is China with their social network, or their social credit score, which is a score of not only your credit score, but your behavior and your friendliness to the government and your contributions to society. So if you say mean things about the government and the lamppost is listening to you or whatever, your social credit score goes down. And a lower social credit score people are the last in the line to get on airplanes or trains, and not good things happen to a low social credit score, where people who have a higher social credit score are more embraced by the government. And so the Chinese people generally see this as a good thing, that they can say, well, the people with a high credit score are better citizens and less likely to commit crime. However, that is immutable and can't change.
Got it. Next question. Deterministic versus open-ended approaches to things. So in blockchain, you have these smart contracts. They're pretty rigid. Only the newest blockchains let you update them. The older ones, once you publish a smart contract, it's pretty much out there for good. So it's kind of like hard coding an algorithm, right? And what we've learned in AI is that instead of hard coding every deterministic outcome that you want to have, it's better to let the machine sort of do this unsupervised learning and have these undirected learning cycles. So is there some way that maybe we can take some of that learning, even in an abstract way, from the AI space, and instead of hard coding these smart contracts, let them be self-learning, self-healing, interoperable, a little bit more groovy, to each other, rather than having somebody sit and deprive them of light and feed them a bunch of Doritos and have them figure out the very last bit of logic on an algorithm.
Yeah, I think that's actually the appeal of blockchain is its determinism.
Yeah.
And that it is one system that really records stuff and cannot be tampered with. If this system were to be based on probabilities, then the swing of a butterfly might change the outcome, and it defeats the purpose of blockchain. So if, as you said, we haven't even figured out consensus ultimately yet, I think that will add another layer of complexity on top of the things that we haven't figured out yet, which is not to say that eventually, maybe, there will be a blockchain system that is based on probabilities, but I don't see that happening in the next 3 to 5 years.
Let me provide a practical example, and maybe it'll color the next response. There's an article today about Amazon shutting down its neural net for hiring recommendations because it took the historical data and it perpetuated the biases in hiring. How do we think about that in the context of this question about consensus mechanisms versus determinism?
I tend to agree that it's quite difficult to think about blockchain being non-deterministic. I sort of think the main connection between machine learning and blockchain is data quality and incentives. And in finance in particular, if you can say this data was committed to the blockchain at this time, that's really valuable, because if you're making a prediction and it's fixed to a certain time, you can't go back and say, oh, I actually predicted this, or I actually said that. You can't do any of that. So that's a really neat thing, that it can kind of like give you this point-in-time data, and then staking as the final thing to get alignment and incentives.
We're kind of out of time, so final thought for the future of humanity, perhaps.
Well, one of the things to worry about that a lot of professionals in the AI business is autonomous, unchecked control of an AI. So, and this relates to sort of smart weapon systems as an example. So if these planes were weaponized and they were smart, they could shoot anybody if that was their goal, but they can also shoot at each other. And the algorithm that the AI, no matter how it's implemented by game theory, is the only surviving algorithm is to shoot first to kill. Because if you hesitate for any reason, you'll be killed. And you won't survive. So a default mode of a smart weapon system is to survive is to shoot first to kill. Now, if these kind of things are out in the wild, this is a dangerous world.
That's the message of hope that we want to leave this.
So some people say that a human should be in the middle of that kill decision, and that works in certain circumstances. But if you're sending, for example, robots to Mars, of which the entire population of Mars is robots right now, that if the robot encounters something that it has to act upon, it'll take several minutes for it to ask and several minutes for the answer to get back there. And so it's practically important to make it smart enough to make these kind of decisions itself. And same thing with buoys out in the ocean and other such things. So there are circumstances where AI systems are getting more and more autonomy and more authority to act on what their algorithm is saying to do. And there's just certain of those circumstances that might be dangerous. And so the fix for that would be having a human in the middle to make those decisions, or different ways to code it out. But AIs and computers are just like biology, and whatever code you write into the memory of that software is hit by cosmic rays just the same way our DNA is hit. So even the things that you code in software and computers is subject to mutation, just like DNA and biology is subject to mutation. So even if you create an algorithm that says, do not do this, a cosmic ray might come through the knot, and then it changes to do this.
Human in the middle. Keep learning, lifelong learning, keep being curious about how things work, keep striving to make things better, because that's why we're all here. Thanks, everyone. That's a wrap. Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
sir.
Thanks.
Thank
Well done.
You.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, sir.
All right.
This is driving me nuts over here. It's like someone's got a piece of cotton and we've been looking at it the whole time.
financial assets, not just currency. Emergence of Internet's own financial market, where people can trade all sorts of virtual assets. Emergence of new classes of investors. A lot of people are switching from other activities like gaming, betting, other businesses to being cryptocurrency traders who would have never became stock traders otherwise. Rapid evolution of the fundraising patterns. ICO, the concept of ICO has accelerated the learning cycle for everyone, both investors and companies. The closest analogy to ICO, I guess, is an IPO, and it used to take 7 years to go through this cycle. Last year, it's been happening within 7 months. So companies had to learn all the things that are required from public company in 7 months instead of 7 years. And they also were failing faster, so investors were also learning faster. So it's acceleration of the learning cycle for the financial markets. And blockchain also became a platform for multiple kinds of trustless applications. And I would like to talk a little bit more about the Internet's own financial system. Another way to look at the Internet is slightly parallel universe that exists in parallel with the physical world that has its own set of rules, laws, and people live completely alternative lives there. For example, it doesn't have a concept of distance. Everyone is in the same room, basically. Anyone can chat with anyone instantly. Duplication of objects is free. There is no need to mine some materials to build new things. You can just copy-paste a file. Distribution of information is free. Everything is like happening instantly, and yeah, so it's an alternative environment with its own set of laws. And what's been missing is a financial system. It had a lot of other infrastructure by 2010, like information exchange via like social networks, Reddit-like websites, and so on. Marketplaces where people traded physical goods, communication channels, media, and so on. But the financial system that was native for this environment was missing. And blockchain has become the financial system that is native to the Internet, and it works according to the laws and rules of the Internet. It uses digital identity such as social network profiles and public keys instead of paper IDs. It works 24/7. It's practically free to participate. Social media is used as a communication channel instead of paper reports and some formal notifications. And everything is pretty much instant and free and global. And participants of this system are all participants of the Internet. There are like 2 million unbanked people in the world, and roughly half of them can't really participate in the traditional financial system. They can't get a bank account. But if they're users of the Internet, they can participate in Internet's financial system. And this is what blockchain represents. And it's much faster, efficient, and works according to the Internet's rules and principles. So it looks really weird when we are trying to apply standards of the Wall Street to the Internet, to the blockchain-based financial markets. It looks pretty much like trying to use professional journalists to write Facebook posts. Professional journalists, they specialize in like using proper language, doing proper investigations, and so on, while Facebook users are expecting to see pictures of kittens and puppies and maybe some GIF animations. This is what they're looking for in Facebook. And when companies are trying to use disclosures that are pretty common for Wall Street, for ICOs, I see that a lot of cryptocurrency investors are simply not interested in reading those materials because they're looking for apps with nice interface and some software that works. Okay, so because blockchain financial markets more efficient and faster environment than paper-based markets that exist on the Wall Street. I predict that blockchain-based companies will quickly outgrow the current generation of financial market companies. Like next Citigroup, next Nasdaq will grow from some of the existing blockchain companies instead of having like all institutions move in to the blockchain, just because they are more native and adapted to this environment. Most of the legal contracts will be rewritten as a software, and they will be governed by consensus algorithm instead of rules of specific jurisdictions. And blockchain will become the persistent layer for multiple virtual objects and virtual reality worlds that are being created right now. There is one more technology that is missing to make it a completely parallel universe. It's mass adoption of the virtual reality. Once it happens, it will be a completely separate world with its own persistence layer where objects persist on the blockchain with its own money, with its own marketplaces, virtual identities, and so on. And I just wanted to remind that private blockchains, at least most of them that I saw, they don't really satisfy the requirements, the minimal viable system requirements that I mentioned in the first slide. They are either managed by humans too much, or they have some like high joining, high entry barriers. They are not entirely decentralized and so on. So I think that they won't be adopted by this market because of that. My time is out. Thank you, everyone.
My name is Greg Osuri. I am the founder of Akash Network, and here to present a concept called the unstoppable web. So, unstoppable web, before we get there, this is me. I am a computer scientist and an aspiring political economist, but I've written a few libraries in Golang that I'm more notable on in the open source community. And I am the founder and CEO of Akash Network and Overclock Labs. And the idea behind Unstoppable Web really is three properties, right? It's decentralized, that means there's no central point of failure, or politically a central point of control. It's ownerless, that means you do not need or require someone to operate a workload running on this new internet. And censorship resistant, that means no one except the beholder of the key can operate or make changes to a workload deployed on this new layer. And why decentralized? Why do I care, right? What does it mean to me? Everybody has a story. For me, it's personal. I got hacked, and when I got hacked, my phone was cloned, and my email was taken over, and my entire life came to a stall to a degree that I couldn't get access to my bank accounts. At that point in my life, the reason I got hacked was because I trusted Google and AT&T to protect my identity. You don't really realize how little control you have in your life until something adverse happens. And at that moment in my life, I realized, in an event like this, we cannot prevent adversities, but we can always work on recovering as quick as possible. And that moment, I realized that, decentralization or taking back control is going to be a personal mission in life. And if you look at the history of the internet, it's when the internet was created. It was supposed to be a network to withstand a nuclear attack, right? Completely decentralized, completely peer-to-peer. But what we end up today is this. I'm pretty sure you heard Reese there talking about the credit score a certain country in the East has for its citizenry based on their social behavior. And we all know what happened in Turkey when the country was shut down pretty much to that disabled all services essential to run society. Of course, we all know about the censorship that we see in China, right? And does anybody remember this date? 27th January 2011. This was the date during Arab Spring when Egypt decided to shut down SMS for 72 million people in that country, right? That is what censorship looks like. When an institution that has a different value set from its citizenry can have so much power to influence on how they communicate. And if you look at, if you really dissect what this control looks like, it really comes down to the foundational layer of this infrastructure, and that happens to be today what we call as a cloud computing. Now, if you look at what's happening in the cloud computing, it's really it came to power, it came to ascendance because it offered two important things that the traditional hosting providers couldn't offer, and that happened to be cost efficiency at the same time being flexible. That means you can boot up these servers when and how you want, and that kind of gave birth to this massive industry. And in 2 years, it will control 53% of the internet traffic. Three companies, right? And the market size is projected to be 80% controlled by three companies, right? So this is the future we have with the centralized cloud today. And on the other side, we have about 500,000 data centers in the world that are only being utilized 15% of the time. So you have this massive latent capacity where on one side, you have this great demand where 3 companies are controlling most of the infrastructure. And you know why that's bad? Because we look at industrial revolution, right? An oligopoly was essentially dictated by U.S. Steel, where U.S. Steel controlled the entire ecosystem, all the way from the miner networks to how the shovels were designed to how the prices were set. So when one or a few elites dictate an industry, they dictate a lot more than just the industry, the lives of the people that are involved. And while industrial revolution was extremely important for evolution of humanity, what we ended up was a oligopoly system, right? And that's why oligopolies are never a great thing, and never a good idea for society in general. Now, if you look at what centralized cloud is basically dictating, it is the biggest threat for open source community. If you look at what Google Cloud and Amazon and Azure, majority of the revenue comes from white label open source projects, basically stealing open source software and calling it their own, right? So this affects a lot more. If you talk about raising capital of your open source companies, it's highly impossible because a VC would ask you, what the hell are you going to do when Amazon comes and eats your pie? And we can go on and as to how these companies are literally thwarting exploiting these open source ecosystems and not really contributing back. And the future of the centralized cloud is very grim. If you think about it, it's centralized, it's inefficient, and it's oligopolistic. And what are we doing about it, right? So we came up with an idea. We realized there are a lot of amazing networks that can work with each other, that do individual functions phenomenally. And there's a project called Handshake, which does DNS, because the first or the last mile of censorship is the DNS, right? And part of Akash, and Akash is compute, and storage can be done by something like IPFS. And now we're seeing the true Web 3.0, the true next promise of the future of the cloud, which is essentially decentralized network working with each other in a manner that the value flows without any friction across these ecosystems, and liquidity is not locked up in any of these ecosystems, right? And this is not something new, and we talk about the ideas as to how they evolved. In the beginning, it was mainframes pretty much as a central entity where you would go to a terminal that has access to a mainframe and you would operate there. And then we saw the rise of client server, where the power was a little more distributed in a highly distributed architecture, where the server and the client was the parity in terms of power was very little. And then we evolved with the advent of mobile. We evolved to a more of a public cloud, where the cloud was a centralized entity that would dictate, and the mobile phones would be essentially a thin layer of access to the centralized cloud. And then the future, we believe, is going to be way more distributed, just like the oscillations of technology that we are used to see as to how they evolve, right? So the future is decentralized cloud, where you have all this latent capacity that sits idle, and that has to be put to good use, and that's the unstoppable web we're talking about. And a little bit about Akash. Akash is a decentralized network for provisioning, scaling, and securing computational workloads, where it is the world's first on-chain auction marketplace with an amazing reverse auction for a highly scalable off-chain container native deployments. And the way it works is really simple. It has 2 main steps. The procurement happens when a tenant puts an order on the order book and specifies the price they're willing to pay for this workload. And you had, in real time, the providers bidding for that job, and the one that usually bids the lowest ends up winning the job. And then we go into something called an off-chain overlay network, where the deployment of the actual workload happens, where the private assets are transferred in a peer-to-peer manner from the client machine that hosts the containers, so that it's pretty secure, right? So this is very unique about Akash, and Akash is probably the only network that does a good synergetic combination of both an on-chain based marketplace with an off-chain based deployment platform. And the Akash blockchain is used to do 2 things: for procurement of infrastructure as well as settlement. You had a delegated proof of stake consensus mechanism, which determines who the block producer is going to be and how the block should be written to the chain. And the config looks extremely simple. I'm going to not keep this talk technical, so I'm going to skip through. It's a very single line deployment, 2 steps, probably one of the most easiest tool chain that you can ever find in the market today. And Akash is built by Overclock Labs, which is a legal entity, and our mission is really to develop protocols, tools, and infrastructure to make the foundational elements of the internet open, decentralized, and secure. With that, I will end my talk. 10 minutes. This is where you find me. I know it's late, but any questions? Rock and roll. Good night, people. That was it. That was really fast, huh?
That was pretty fast, yeah.
That's what I drink.
Good job. Very lively.
Yeah, good job on the signing, though. Good job.
Really fast.
I know.
You guys ready?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
Fortunately, we can't bring the Tesla inside. That's what the venue folks told me. They said, Kurt, you can't change stuff on the fly. So we can't bring the Tesla inside, but what we'll do is we'll put the presentation and let them tell us how did they achieve that Guinness record of driving Tesla, I think 600, 700 miles on just one charge. So as soon as the presentation is up, they're going to come up, and that's our last panel. Yes? Okay. How are you guys feeling so far? Thank you for staying till the last minute. And because you guys staying at the last minute, what you guys didn't realize is that you'll get the front seating tomorrow if you come get me and get a little token from me. Do you guys know what's happening tomorrow? We have Nawal Ravikant coming and the fireside chat with Taleb Nassim. That's going to be intensely packed. So if you guys are coming in, make sure you come in early because the parking lots will be full and somewhat security will be tight. But if you guys want to come sit up front, come get me. I'll give you a little business card with like a star on it, which you can replicate and give it to your friends. All right, I'm going to stop talking and get them on stage.
Inside of here because they were concerned about the gas fumes. It's a bad EV joke, really corny EV joke. My name is Sean Mitchell. This is Eric Strait, and we are Tesla owners. We're Tesla enthusiasts and YouTubers, and we also belong to a local Denver Tesla club. And we actually got to talking a few months ago about how cool it would be to hypermile a Tesla Model 3 because no one had ever done it up until this point. Now, that was last May that we did the hypermile, and we spent 34 hours together in a car with no air conditioning and, thankfully, some really, really good deodorant. So, so looking back at that event, we thought that there were some really interesting takeaways and parallels between hypermiling a Tesla and starting a business. And so we want to share with you 5 takeaways that we have learned from hypermiling the Tesla Model 3. Now, I want to ask a real quick question here. So who all is familiar with hypermiling and what it is? Is there anyone that's familiar with it? So we're going to start with the basics then. So hypermiling is a basic term for making a car go as efficiently as possible. Now, this is not an EV alone term. This can be done in a gasoline car as well, but with an electric car, it's really interesting because what you do is you want to maximize how far the distance is that you go on a single charge. Now, with this particular car, the Tesla Model 3, the stated range is 310 miles of range if you charge it up to 100%. Our objective with this car, when we did this hypermile in May, was to take it at least twice that distance, so more than 600 miles. What did we do to maximize the range? Well, we did things like turn off the AC, the air conditioning. We did things like pump up the tires to 5 psi more than what the factory suggested, which got us to hypermiling and breaking a world record. So the first takeaway that we've got with this hypermile is preparation. Preparation is key. So we gathered together a bunch of food and drinks. We got fans that plugged into USBs that were powered by external energy sources. And then we also spent a great deal of time doing dry runs, figuring out which route was going to be most efficient, which one had the least amount of elevation change, and more importantly, which one had the best cell signal for live streaming, because we live streamed the entire 34 hours. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But the key takeaway here is that sometimes when you plan and rehearse, you realize that what you had initially thought was going to work didn't. When we did the dry run the first time, we realized that the elevation change was too great and was not going to get us to our objective of traveling more than twice the rated range of the Model 3.
Yeah, so next up, we actually found our champion. So prior to the event, we did reach out to different Tesla clubs, some other fans that we had. We reached out to Tesla themselves, some news outlets, and we were looking at some paid sponsors. And that really just helped us solidify really nice core to work on. And to do that, we minimized stopping as much as possible. So we actually had a friend, David, who brought us food and drinks along the way. And as you can see here, we put a net out the window and captured everything as we went by. We tried to minimize stopping, and the only time we did have to stop, we actually got some ice water from David and had to put towels around it. It was 107 degrees in that car for pretty much, I don't know, a good 8-hour chunk of driving. So it was not that great. And a big takeaway here is use champions in your circle. So a lot of the Denver Tesla Club members actually came out and drove a couple laps with us and tweeted that out, put that out on their social media. We used our investors' resources as best as possible and helped leverage media and press to get just as much coverage as we could.
All right, the next point in topic is that you can do a lot of the planning, but you'll inevitably encounter obstacles. And this one is really, really key, I think, for early companies and startups, because you're figuring things out, for the most part, all the time. You're doing things for the first time. And we encountered a few obstacles in this hypermile. One of them, which is really humorous, at each sunset, we'd see this bunny that would be grazing and eating the grass along the side of the road. Well, in one instance, which you can see in this photo here to the left, the bunny actually ran out in front of us. We almost killed the bunny, but thankfully, and thankfully we had the good reaction time, we did not run over that bunny. And because we were live streaming this whole thing, we were getting this interaction from the viewers. And one of the viewers made up this story about this bunny being hired by big oil companies. So it got nicknamed Big Oil Bunny, or Bob for short. The bunny was hired by Big Oil to detract us from our goal, which was to bring more attention to electric vehicles. The other obstacle that we ran into was towards the end of the trip, and we had an issue with the battery. It actually stopped long before we were expecting it, but we're going to talk a little bit more about exactly what happened here in just a moment. So the business takeaway is expect the best, but plan for the worst, so that if something bad happens, you're not surprised.
Yeah, and so kind of along that line, planning was key.
it'll likely take you longer than you expect. We found that out. We actually did get a 2-hour late start because some things came up. And then we thought it would only take about 26 hours. It took us 34. And luckily, there were 2 of us that we could alternate driving. And in doing so, whoever wasn't driving was either taking a nap or fielding questions from the live stream, which actually I think helped keep me awake a lot, which was nice. But it really helped because we did have audience and we have subscribers from around the world. So being on that long, we were able to give all our subscribers a chance to actually watch us do this at some point or another. And throughout the entire thing, we had at least probably 200 people watching. And then towards the end, we spiked to 400, almost 500. And it really had a great, successful viewership.
It was really interesting because my wife was watching at home, and she said that she was addicted. She couldn't stop watching the live stream. You'd think that it would be terribly boring to watch 2 dudes driving a car at 25 miles an hour in a 1-mile loop, but she said it was quite addicting and riveting, almost like true reality TV.
Definitely. So the takeaway from that, stuff happens. We just adapted with it. We worked with it. So as soon as 26 hours rolled around, we realized we were nowhere close to reaching our goal, and the car still had some juice, so we just worked through it.
Okay, so the next takeaway was, and the last one, shoot for the stars and you'll land on the moon. What we had thought was, based on our calculations, we would have been able to travel 670 miles. The battery in the Tesla Model 3 is a 75 kilowatt hour pack. So when we ran out those figures and numbers, we estimated that we could do 670 miles. 670 miles would have broken the world record for any hypermile, not just Model 3, but the Model S as well. Well, as I mentioned before, the car actually died unexpectedly. We learned that after sending the car to Tesla after the event, that the car used 9 kilowatt hours just trying to maintain the battery temperature because of the 100 degree temperatures that we were experiencing throughout the middle of the day. So we lost 9 kilowatt hours and only got 66 out of it. However, we did cross over 600 miles, which was an awesome feat.
It was a lot higher than I expected going into it because, I mean, 600, thinking about it now, it's crazy.
Yes, yep. So what does that mean? We wished, we hoped for, we planned to hit 600, but even though we didn't, we still did cross a significant milestone of 600 miles. And not only that, but when the battery ran out of energy, we were greeted by some Denver Tesla Club members and owners. And that was at midnight, by the way, so it was quite special to have these people who had been following along on the live stream head to where we were doing the hypermile and greet us and celebrate and pop the champagne bottles. Tesla and Elon Musk also tweeted out some of the content and news that we were publishing kind of in real time, so that was really, really cool. And then lastly, I think that getting exposure from websites, tech websites all around the globe was something that was really, really cool. And even though we didn't hit that 670, some really, really special things happened because of it.
Yeah, it was really helpful for our sponsors and everything too, just to reach such a broad audience. But yeah, so that isn't the end for us. We are actually going to be going for round 2, so we can try to hit that 650, 670 mile range. So maybe in the next coming months, you'll hear more about that. But definitely check out our social media and you can kind of follow along on our next journey.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We'll start again tomorrow at 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, the doors will open for registration, breakfast, the Indian food, and all the other good things. And hope you guys had a great time. All right, see you guys tomorrow. Thank you.